Hey, if you're new to my channel, then consider liking and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me, and honestly, it'd make my day. If you already did, thank you so much. Oh, and by the way, if you like listening to fan fiction, check out my other channel. The link's in the description.
Chimera Luffy by mellra. What if Luffy ate a different devil's fruit as a child? Not just any fruit, but the most powerful of the Zoan fruits, the Chimera fruit. It is a legendary Zoan fruit that allows the user to take on the forms of any Zoan fruit users, as well as a true form as the mythical Chimera. How will this change the course of the One Piece world? Pairing most likely Luffy/Boa Hancock, adios.
Sanji in a mountain ram form Luffy with an unconscious Nami strapped to his back kept up their march towards the drum-shaped mountain. Luffy suddenly called out, "It feels like it's gotten a little colder. The wind's picking up too." Sanji rolled his eyes, as if fighting back the urge to tell him, "No duh." Luffy, trying to pass the time, decided to spark up a conversation with his chef. He talked to Sanji about how people in countries of snow never sleep at all. Sanji looked to him. "Huh, why? 'Cause if they do they'll freeze to death," Luffy said as if it was a little-known fact. Sanji thought that over before he cried out, "Don't be an idiot, everyone has to sleep sometime." "It's the truth. Someone told me a long time ago," Luffy insisted. Just then, a strange white rabbit jumped them, attempting to bite Luffy. Luffy easily moved out of the way as the rabbit, which could only be one of the Lapons Dalton mentioned, missed and hit the snow behind them. Luffy didn't show any signs of even noticing that something just tried to attack him as he and Sanji went on with their discussion. "Who? Usopp," Sanji said, who didn't react at all at the rabbit attacking them a second ago. "No, I heard it at a pub in my village," Luffy explained. Sanji challenged Luffy's theory by asking why Dalton would have a bed in his house if he never slept. Luffy blinked, having never thought about that. "I guess that's a good point," he admitted before his eyes widened as if he just figured out the answer. "Hey, maybe it's for when he dies." As the Lapon continued to try and attack them, this time going after Sanji, probably thinking that he might have been an easier target. But Sanji easily dodged it without even bothering to stop running. It was really funny to watch after a while. The little guy kept trying to attack them, but they kept going onwards, still continuing their conversation without ever stopping. Sanji then began to ask Luffy about if he knew that women who lived in snowy countries all have skin as smooth as silk. "How come?" Luffy asked curiously, "Isn't it obvious?" Sanji asked with a tone of irritation. He went on to explain that the women who live where it's cold have to rub their skin all the time to keep warm, and that's why their skin was always soft, smooth, and so white that it was almost see-through. When Luffy asked why it was white, the whole time the Lapon continued to try and attack, though it never worked. But Sanji answered as if he was being dumb, because, the snow, it's constantly falling all over them so it dyes their skin all white. "Geez, you're really dumb, you know that?" Luffy said. Sanji glared as he shouted out, "Give me a break, like you're really one to talk," and to take his anger out, when the Lapon attacked again, Sanji kicked it far away from them, as if kicking a ball as it went flying. "You're becoming a pain in my butt," he yelled and watched the rabbit disappear into the distance. "Really, what's with that thing?" Luffy asked as he watched it fly away, to which Sanji gave a non-concerned shrug. Onwards they went towards the mountain. For Sanji and Luffy the journey was becoming harder with each minute. The wind picked up and was trying to blow them backwards, the cold slowing them down as they reached even deeper snow. Even with Luffy's thick wool pelt, he started feeling the biting cold as Nami shivered on his back. "Nami, just hang in there a little bit longer," Sanji said as he ran next to Luffy, and muttered more words of encouragement. "We gonna get you to a doctor all right?" "The snow getting really deep around here," Luffy commented as they fought their way through the deep snow, and Sanji barking at him to try and run more smoothly because he was making it hard on Nami. But the two suddenly stopped and were staring in front of them at the white snow. Luffy's animal instinct started going haywire while Sanji got a bad feeling that was honed thanks to his years of training. The whiteness in front of them suddenly moved and, for a moment, they thought they were looking at a herd of polar bears, but bears don't have long ears. It was hard to guess how many there were, but there had to be several dozen of them at least, large rabbits as big as bears, standing upright with arms like gorillas, pinkish red eyes looking at them and fangs bared. Sanji seemed completely taken aback as he stared at them. What are these things? Well, they're big and they're white. So they must be polar bears, decided Luffy, though for the life of him he couldn't figure out the overly long ears. Just then, the one in front jumped, his teeth showing as he attacked. Sanji screamed, "Look out!" Luffy jumped out of the way as the Lapon's attack broke the snow like stone. "Serious? How can it move like that?" Sanji asked in shock. "Is it a gorilla?" "No, it's a polar bear," cried out Luffy. "It's a rabbit," Sanji screamed suddenly. "How do you go from a gorilla to rabbit?" Luffy yelled back. "These must be the Lapon's that Dalton was telling us about." Sanji suddenly spoke as they looked back at them. And he was clearly trying to think of a way out of this. "Well, there sure are a lot of them." Just then, Nami groaned a little on Luffy's back and everyone turned their attention to her. They couldn't tell if she was aware of what was going on, or if she was dreaming now as she whimpered a little in her sleep. Obviously in a lot of pain. "Nami?" Luffy suddenly asked and she looked up as even past Sanji was looking at them, ignoring the threat of the Lapon's for the moment. "Hurry, Allah, basta," Nami whispered, though it had been very difficult to make out the slur in her words, they didn't need to guess what she was trying to say. Luffy's eyes grew concerned as he whispered quietly to her, "Just rest, never mind that. We'll worry about that later." It wasn't clear if she could understand his words, but the gentleness in his voice seemed to soothe her because she did appear to fall back into a deep sleep when she pressed her face against his back. Sanji was also smiling at her. "She's not even worried about her own life," he said softly as he looked back to the Lapon's. "Just hang in there a little longer, Nami. Let's get going. We have to make it to that castle where the doctor lives, quickly." He stepped forward and yelled out, "Move it, you stupid bunnies." The Lapon in the front took a step forward, clearly tired of waiting. "They're coming," Luffy exclaimed. "Yeah," Sanji agreed before he said very seriously so that there couldn't be room to argue, "Listen Luffy, I don't want you fighting these guys, alright?" Luffy was about to argue against that. But in the end Sanji managed to convince Luffy to stand down and he nodded in understanding as he heaved her back onto his back when she slipped a little. Then, Luffy had one of his once-in-a-blue-moon brilliant ideas. He asked Sanji to momentarily hold Nami, which he eagerly did but still asked his captain what he was doing. Luffy went back to his human form, grinned, and said, "I'm going to try and talk them into letting us pass." With that, his hair turned white and went to cover his entire body. In a moment, Luffy took the form of a Lapon nearly identical to the ones in front of them minus the scar under his one eye. The giant rabbits in front of them seemed fairly surprised by the sudden change, but they held back for the moment to see what was going on. Luffy stepped forward and started making grunting and growling noises to the other Laffins. One, obviously the leader by its stance and the crescent scar by its one eye, stepped forward and growled back. This went on for about a minute before Luffy turned back to his human form, calmly took Nami from Sanji's hands, tied her back to his back, took a deep breath, and yelled, "Run." The Lapons finally attacked, all of them at once, and Luffy had to dodge every blow that was sent his way. "What the heck did they say, Luffy?" Sanji screamed as he kicked one of the Laffins away from the group. "That smaller rabbit you kicked earlier? Apparently, kid, and they're not gonna stop until they either pay us back or eat us," Luffy shouted out. Sanji paled. Oh crap. Though large for their size, they were all remarkably light on their feet and acrobatic, not to mention this was their territory, their home island. They clearly had a big advantage not just in numbers but on terrain as well. "Remember not to fight, Luffy," Sanji reminded the straw hat wearing boy. Luffy yelled, "That's a little difficult." Luffy continued to escape around the Lapons, trying to be as gentle as possible with Nami as Sanji kicked every Lapon that got too close. However, it didn't seem to be doing much damage for they kept throwing themselves at them. Sanji cursed. He explained to Luffy that he couldn't get his footing well enough in the snow to land a good kick. Each one of the Lapon's ears twitch a little and they're attacking all at once. Luffy screamed as the sky was filled with the monster rabbits and Sanji screamed for him to head to the trees as he covered him. Luffy gently placed Nami on his back, turned back into his mountain goat form as he turned and ran, heading right to the cover of the foliage, the wind blowing off his hat at the same time. It was a bit of a shock when he didn't turn back for it, but here, Nami really was the first priority. Thankfully, Sanji had managed to grab it as he ran after him, with the rabbits still after them. The rabbits were easily able to catch up to them, even able to cut them off more than once. They charged out at every direction and it was impossible to tell where they would come from next. Once they had reached the trees, however, the rabbits only kept watch, not able to move as easily with all the tree trunks in the way. "Go left," Sanji ordered, pointing straight to a high cliff. "The only chance they had to get away here, we'll head to the mountains." "Okay," Luffy said, and they turned together as Sanji went on about how to shake them off. The biggest problem was when they looked through the trees, they could see that they were keeping up with them, ready to strike when they escaped the cover of the woods. Another rabbit appeared and tried to strike at Luffy, who dodged it, and he looked like he was about to attack back, but Sanji stepped in. Once he took it out, he began to tell Luffy off for attacking as he tried to keep Nami from slipping again. Luffy apologized as Sanji put the straw hat back on Luffy's head. "This is no time to be screwing around," he said as they ran, getting nearer to the cliff, but that meant running out from the trees and they were surrounded again. Sanji was forced to stay behind fighting them off as Luffy reached the ledge, screaming that they could go up from there. "Right. Go on," Sanji yelled as another Lapon tried to attack him, but Luffy used him as a stepping stone to jump up safely to the ledge, with Sanji right behind them. The two were looking down at the whole herd of them, and Luffy just had to stick his tongue out at them childishly, which led them all to jump at once. "Did you really have to taunt them?" Sanji demanded. "Sorry," Luffy cried out as the cook ordered them to just make a wild run for the top of the mountain. They kept going for what felt like hours, and they only stopped when Luffy and Sanji when they had to catch their breath, but when they looked back, it was a shock to see that the rabbits had disappeared. "They coming?" Luffy asked. "No, it doesn't look like it," Sanji called behind him, looking back and forth, trying to make sure that there wasn't anything there. "Alright, I guess we lost them," Luffy said with a smile. Sanji disagreed, pointing in front of them to see that they were back. In front of them, the whole herd was there, much farther away than they had been when they first ran into them. How'd they get there so quickly? "They don't give up," Luffy exclaimed loudly just before the entire herd suddenly started to jump up and down in place. "Why are they jumping up and down?" Luffy asked, his instincts causing his fur to stand on end. Still, he tried to remain optimistic. "Maybe they're grouchy 'cause they're hungry." Sanji went as white as the snow around them. "Wait a second, don't tell me, oh no," he gasped as his eyes widened in realization. He was so shocked that he dropped his cigarette, looking ready to cry. "Those stupid bunnies, great. They've done it now, this isn't good." "Wait, what are you talking about?" Luffy asked, looking back at him. "And what are the bunnies doing?" Sanji was telling Luffy that they had to run, and as he said that, he was actually backing up a few steps. "We're running again," Luffy repeated in confusion. "Where to?" "Anywhere. As long as it's far away," Sanji screamed, completely losing any cool that he had. That was when they could hear a deep rumble going through the snow beneath their feet, as if there was another giant walking around. Just then, the whole ground was trembling, almost like there was an earthquake happening. The thick snow above them slowly began to slide off the mountain, and before anyone knew it, a giant wall of white appeared and was heading straight for them, as big as an ocean wave during a Grand Line storm. "Because there's about to be an avalanche," Sanji shouted as Luffy screamed, and they ran for it. Without looking back, Luffy quickly did the same and they ran back down the mountain as the endless waves of snow continued to chase after them. As fast as they were, however, they couldn't outrun this. "Those stupid overgrown bunnies, I'm gonna kill them," Sanji screamed. Luffy screamed out in panic to Sanji as to how they were supposed to escape all the snow. "No clue," Sanji screamed over the roar that was quickly catching up. "All I know is that our first priority is Nami. Our second priority is Nami and our third priority is Nami. Got that, Luffy? Protect her even if it kills you." "I got it, but how do I do that?" Luffy screamed as the avalanche pulled trees up and they became part of the mess that was still hurtling towards them. A light bulb went off in Luffy's head and he asked if it would be a good idea to turn into a bird and fly them all to safety. But Sanji gave a negative as it would both take time to lift off that they didn't have, and there was no telling what the rough mountain winds would be like for turbulence. They kept running as fast as they could before Sanji spotted a high ledge just ahead of them and he screamed to head for it. "Why?" Luffy yelled back. "Just run. We need to get up as high as we possibly can," Sanji yelled back in reply. His expression showed that he didn't understand, but he followed Sanji to the cliff anyway just with the snow was at their heels. And as they continued on they jumped just as the avalanche finally caught up. But it was far from over. Sanji was just starting to say that they made it in time, but then more snow came tumbling down. This time there was nothing they could do as it washed over their heads. The two froze in fear as they stared at it, and suddenly the force of the avalanche knocked them right off their feet and were sent flying in the air. Suddenly they were all suddenly sliding down the avalanche with all the wreckage from the nearby trees. Luffy was up in the air, spinning a little as he looked around desperately for a way out of this. Nami still sleeping like a baby on his back. But just as it looked like Luffy had run out of luck, he turned in the air and managed to land onto one of the tree trunks, now sledding down the mountain like a toboggan. Luffy was looking around for Sanji and he spotted the cook ahead of him, quickly being buried alive in front of them. "Sanji!" Luffy screamed in worry as he stretched out his horns for him. "Grab on." Sanji pulled out of the snow and pulled onto the tree behind Luffy and Nami. "Thanks for that, Luffy," he panted. Luffy noticed they were going back the way they came as he yelled that they were just going to keep going down the mountain unless they did something. Sanji was furious. "No way!" he yelled out at once as he looked shrinking mountain behind them. "I'm never gonna let that happen. We've come all this way and we were almost at the base of the mountain. Just feet away from the doctor." He glared back at Luffy and yelled, "Luffy, you need to come up with a way to stop all this right now." But Luffy looked completely lost as Sanji continued to rant. "It's all because of those stupid bunnies," he declared. "Next time I see them, I'm going to turn them into a big bowl of stew." As if they heard the threat, the Lapons appeared out of nowhere and looked ready for round two. They could only look on in amazement to see that the overgrown rabbits were riding tree trunks like snowboards. Luff didn't notice them right away and was muttering about rabbit stew and how good that sounded. The battle went on against the duo and the Lapons. Unlike before, however, the two couldn't run anywhere but down on the makeshift sled. They were completely surrounded on all sides and the bunnies just kept jumping up with perfect teamwork. It was only going to be a matter of time before they hit their target and do some real damage. "What do we do?" Luffy yelled frantically, already running out of room where to go. "The only thing we can do at the moment. Slide faster," Sanji yelled as he pushed their tree to go faster. "What is their problem? Getting all this worked up over one little brat?" Sanji yelled as they were ruthlessly attacked and they were forced to jump a little on the tree to avoid the attacks. "Seriously?" he yelled, unsure as to how much longer they could keep this up. But things just went from bad to worse when they looked down the mountain and could see that directly in their path was a giant rock with several broken and jagged tree trunks. And they were heading right for it. With the bunnies on either side of them they couldn't maneuver to avoid this incoming impact. The two on the tree spotted it as well and they were screaming about what to do. "You can't crash into that thing," Sanji yelled as the Lapons started their attack again. "You're the one in charge of keeping Nami safe right now." "That's easy for you to say," Luffy screamed. "The rabbits determined to make the kill here." Just as Luffy declared that they were going to crash, Sanji did something truly selfless this time. At the last second, he grabbed hold of Luffy by the back of his jacket and threw him right off the tree. "Ladies get treated gently," were the last words he cried out, a satisfied smile on his face as he made his last request. "So you take care of her." "Sanji!" Luffy yelled in horror as he crashed. With a horrible crunching sound, Sanji hit the rock and, as limp as a rag doll, he was thrown right off with several other Lapons and the debris of some trees. Almost as if in slow motion, Sanji's body fell from the air and hit the snow, being buried a second time. Luffy screamed out, horrified at what just happened before he transformed back into his human form in order to grab hold of the same miniature cliff that almost killed them. Dangling on as the rush of snow rushed all around them, he looked back, seeing that Sanji was already mostly buried and he screamed out his name. But Sanji never answered, and it was either because he was out cold or too hurt to do so. "What were you thinking? Next time you do something like that, warn me," Luffy screamed as a long monkey's tail burst from his spine and wrapped around Sanji's hand. But this time Sanji was pulled away too fast and hard for Luffy to pull him back. All he was able to save was a single mitten and Luffy freaked out. "Sanji!" Luffy yelled in desperation. His voice echoed around them as he screamed out, "Saw and JJJJJJI." After the avalanche subsided, the landscape was different. There was snow covering everything, much more than before. You could still make out the shape of the avalanche surrounding them. Instead of even level of snow, there were large packs of it like miniature hills and large, broken trees scattered every few feet. It was as silent as a grave around them. Luffy was still hanging from the cliff. Apparently it had been just high enough to have protected him and Nami from the current of snow. He appeared to be unharmed, but he was shaking as he stared around him, trying to figure out what he should do. He pulled himself up to the ledge, quickly untying Nami from his back and gently laying her down beside him. He was breathing hard as he looked up, trying to get some kind of glimpse of Sanji, but nothing. He looked from the landscape to Nami and back again before he seemed to have made up his mind. He pulled off his coat and covered her like a blanket and even pulled off his mittens to serve as a pillow for her head. She wasn't looking good at all. Her face was as red as a tomato and it was clear that her fever was reaching dire levels by this point. "Nami, I'm sure you're cold," Luffy said to her softly, though he wasn't sure she could even hear him. "Just hang in there a little longer." Luffy took off his hat and placed it on her chest, finishing up by saying, "Listen, hold on to this for me and I'll be right back, okay?" Convinced that she would be alright by herself for a moment, he turned and dove off the ledge, as he started to look around for Sanji. When he landed, he took the form of a black-furred Saint Bernard and started sniffing around at the snow. Luffy was running across the snow, sinking deep every few feet before he was able to pull himself back up and continue searching. Every time he called out for Sanji's name, it seemed to become more desperate as he picked up his pace and began to run. Onwards he went before the snow that he stepped let out a soft groan beneath his feet. Luffy stopped dead as he looked back and he got down on his knees as he began to dig. Luffy's paws worked frantically as he continued to dig down deeper and deeper. Finally he spotted the dark coat that Sanji had been wearing. Luffy let out a cry of shock and dug more desperately. Soon, Luffy had been able to pull him out and lay him on the snow with his muzzle. The chef was a mess. There was a blue tint to his face as he struggled for breath, and he was completely out of it, but miraculously alive. Luffy sighed in relief as he went back to human form and tried to shake him awake, but realized that there was blood on his hands when he touched Sanji's chest. Not enough to worry about him bleeding to death right away, but even Luffy could tell that he needed a doctor just as badly as Nami did. "Sanji, are you okay?" Luffy screamed out, but he might have just been talking to the snow for all the good it did. Realizing that Sanji wasn't going to answer him anytime soon, Luffy got back up, carefully dragging him with him up the snowy slope to where Nami was waiting for them. Luffy lay Sanji down before he turned Nami over and heaved her onto his back again, letting her keep his coat, but he left his mittens there. Luffy's body seemed to stretch and grow as translucent, nearly white-colored fur. In the form of a polar bear, Luffy snorted as he picked up Sanji like a sack of flour under his arm and began the long hike back up the mountain. Luffy wasn't moving as fast as he had been before with the added weight and cold hanging around him. Even with his enhanced strength, the bear boy knew not to apply too much force or to go too fast, lest his precious cargo wind up worse than before. He went through all this freezing cold on his own, but suddenly he spotted something digging in the snow up ahead. It was the baby rabbit that caused the whole mess. The little rabbit was digging desperately in the snow where he saw that it was trying to dig out a gigantic paw with claws, which could only be its parent. Luffy was slowly making his way towards the little baby, still trying to dig around the clawed paw. As Luffy looked closer, there was some pink in the snow and the little baby's own paws looked frozen. He was sucking on them in pain as he cried out, still trying to help free its parent, though at this rate it wasn't making much progress on its own. But it didn't going, and they knew that it probably would have kept going even if it destroyed his paws. As Luffy's crunching footsteps drew nearer, it heard him and stopped to glare back at him. It turned around, shielding its parent's giant paw with its own body, growling at him not to come any closer. Luffy came right up to the baby Lapon and stared down at him, his expression unreadable as the little guy snarled, trying to scare him into just leaving. His eyes shadowed over so that they couldn't be seen. With his other arm, he slowly reached down towards them. The little baby covered his head and closed his eyes, clearly thinking that he was going to hurt him, but instead, Luffy reached over to grab the large Lapon by its paw, and with a great pull, managed to pull it out of the snow. The full-grown Lapon seemed to be dazed and confused, but was still alive as the little baby cried out and hugged the massive, furry stomach, burying its face in the warm fur. Luffy heaved Nami up higher on his back and continued on his way, both crewmates lying limp as dolls. Luffy was speaking again as they got closer to the mountain. "I'll get you there, don't worry. You just stay alive, both of you." They walked on for about 15 more minutes and nothing happened, but that soon changed. There was the sounds of something crunching through the snow behind them and a familiar voice yelling out smugly, "Found you." Wapol was running towards them on the back of giant hippo-like animal with long hair with his two flunkies. Luffy turned as well just as Wapol went riding right up to him and stopped so that he was blocking his way. "Now I'll make you pay, you straw hats," Wapol cried out. Wapol declared that he was going to chew Luffy up into little pieces and spit him out. While he wasn't sure if the bear holding the two people was in fact that boy who sent him flying earlier, he recognized the blonde man from the ship as well as the hat placed firmly on the bear's head. "Move it," Luffy said simply. "Huh? I don't think so," Wapol said smugly. "Why would I want to do that?" Luffy must have known that he couldn't afford to waste any more time here as Wapol declared that he had no intention of making it easy for them to get away from here after what he did to him. But to add insult to injury, Luffy just turned and walked around him as if he wasn't worth the trouble of fighting and continued upwards. "Hey!" Wapol yelled. Wapol began yelling at Chess to write down a new law in a giant book. That anyone who ignores the king will be executed, and he ordered the two flunkies to kill Nami and Sanji since they were ignoring him the most. Luffy immediately turned around in shock. What did he say? The two jumped high in the air and were giving chase. "I got the woman on his back," Chess cried out. "I'll take the man with the afros, whose name was Kuromarimo," declared as they jumped, several sharp spikes coming out of the afro on his fist. Luffy immediately moved back, making sure that he was able to get Sanji out of harm's way before he made the attack. Suddenly, Luffy stopped. His eyes looked to Nami and Sanji and gritted his teeth as he started to run, narrowly missing the arrows that Chess shot. "Can't fight," Luffy cursed as he made a run for it. "You're gonna regret this later." Luffy yelled to the three of them, "Don't follow me." There were several more arrows heading for him. They would have struck Nami in the back, but at the last second, Luffy actually did a back flip, narrowly missing them as he kept running as soon as his feet hit the ground. It was quite impressive, given Luffy's 9-foot-tall frame and 500-pound bulk, but let it never be said that Luffy was ordinary no matter what form he's in. Luffy kept running as fast as he could, despite everything. He ran on for some time, eventually losing sight of Wapol and his men far behind him. Luffy looked back for a moment and he couldn't see anyone either. "Huh? There's no one? That's weird. Did they already give up?" he asked himself in confusion. Suddenly, Wapol's giant mouth appeared through the sleet in front of him. Luffy looked back to avoid it at the last second. He missed being eaten by jumping up high into the air as the rest of Wapol stepped out of the snow, but he was smiling as the two henchmen appeared as well from just above them. "Here's what a snow bottle's really like," Kuromarimo yelled. "White concealment." "Those two are so incredibly weak that just one shot should be enough," Chess said, his wavy lips turning into a slight smile. But this time Luffy couldn't move in midair like this and he screamed out as they moved in. Just as all hope seemed lost, several white blurs jumped up from behind them and knocked the two lackeys away like cats batting balls of yarn away. "Le Pons!" Wapol cried out in disbelief. The two flunkies were wondering the same thing. Kuromarimo just demanded, "Did those things just protect him?" "That's impossible," Chess cried out. "Le Pons never form bonds with humans. They're nothing but wild beasts." Luffy landed farther in front of them as the two rabbits stood between him and Wapol. One of them looking back at him with a baby hanging onto its back and a jagged scar over one of its eyes. Luffy stared at it and it stared back. "I know you," Luffy whispered quietly, looking at them. The two just continued looking back at Luffy. This time there was a calmness in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Just then, they both pumped their arms out. Luffy smiled as well as he cried out, "Thanks a bunch. You guys saved me." And without another word he turned and continued to run as the Le Pons turned back to face Wapol and his men. The journey got harder as the blizzard quickly got worse. Luffy was soon struggling to take a single step forward. It was like every step forward he took, the wind blew him back 2 steps. It didn't take too long for it to become so that he couldn't even see in front of them. The snow was now up past his knees, and even as a bear he was feeling cold by this point. He was shivering as he forced his freezing body to keep going forward, his face now almost as red as Nami's under his fur, and he was gritting his teeth together to keep them from chattering. Luffy kept walking. He kept chanting one word under his breath as he fought against the powerful wind like a spell. Doctor, doctor, doctor. Luffy was now forced to move, had hardly more than a crawl by this point. He contemplated turning into a penguin to just ride the snow on his belly, which he cursed the fact he didn't think of it during the avalanche, but realized it was too risky with two sick, injured people, and also there wasn't a sharp enough decline to gain momentum. But at long last, after what felt like a lifetime, he finally came to a solid, white wall directly in front of them. It took him a minute to realize what it was as he looked up and couldn't even see the top. They finally made it to the base of the mountain. Luffy stared up at it, as if he couldn't believe that he got here. Luffy looked around, clearly hoping for some kind of way up. "There's a doctor up there," Luffy said to himself, and he seemed to be preparing himself for something unpleasant. He took another look at his two friends before he said, "All right, Nami and Sanji. Just a little farther to go, hang on a little longer." The captain retied Nami extra tight on his back, shifted back into his human form, and picked up Sanji by his teeth. His body then took on the shape of a monkey, and it could only mean one thing. Luffy found several grooves in the mountain and tested his weight. Luffy had pulled himself up the ground and very slowly was making his way up the impossibly tall mountain. How he was able to climb like this was anyone's guess, but he was definitely making progress as the ground soon disappeared from sight from the snowstorm around them. Every second the wind got harsher and the temperature seemed to drop. There was so much snow that it was a miracle that Luffy could see more than a foot in front of him. Yet despite alling with surprisingly gentle moves, as to not make it any harder for his friends than was necessary. When he looked back down at the ground to see it disappear in the blizzard, there was a powerful resolution shining in his eyes. He was going to climb this mountain and reach the top no matter what it took. Luffy would stop every few feet to catch his breath or to search for more grooves in the mountain for him to grab hold of before he was able to pull himself up even farther. Time seemed slowed down around them as quickly as Luffy was freezing. His body was turning a dark red color under his much thinner fur, and blood was dripping down his arms as his fingers and toes were cut like they were digging themselves into shards of glass. And fate seemed to laugh at him as an extra strong gust of wind came out of nowhere and blew his red coat right off Nami's back and fluttered away from them like the very last leaf in autumn being blown off the tree. The scariest moment was when Luffy stretched his hand out to grab hold of the next groove. His hand ended up slipping and his nails, that had already frozen, cracked. Luffy screamed. However, when he did open his mouth to shriek, he ended up accidentally dropped Sanji, who fell lifelessly. Luffy looked down, horrified that he had dropped him. "San NJG!" He screamed at the top of his lungs, and he stretched his tail down like a snake and hooked on Sanji's coat, causing Sanji to bounce up and down a few times like a yo-yo. "That was a close one," Luffy muttered as he carefully brought Sanji back up before he kept going, blood now rushing down his arm from his injured hand. It only became even more painful to watch as Luffy's visible bright red skin slowly started to turn red to blue to a very sick-looking purple. Luffy stopped, his chest breathing hard through gritted teeth, trying to get as much air as he could before he kept going. His hands were now starting to go to a very pale color, though it was hard to tell with all the warm blood that froze on his arms and shaking limbs. Luffy continued to heave himself up several feet, but the rock he grabbed onto broke and he slid down the mountain. Luffy dug his hands and feet into the mountain. The already sensitive skin was being torn to shreds and left 4 long trails of blood on the mountains. Luffy slowed down and eventually stopped. He was shaking as he hung onto the side of the stone, biting down on Sanji's coat as he seemed to be fighting the urge to scream again, his unshed tears freezing like icicles on his face. He must have slid down a good 40 or 50 feet, yet he began again, still climbing up as if nothing happened once he got his bearings. No matter how cold it was, no matter how much pain he was in, he wasn't not giving up, he would not let go. It could have been hours or even days before the top of the mountain finally came into their sights. These last few feet were clearly the most painful for him, and he slowed down considerably, now struggling to move. He was either so cold that he couldn't move his limbs properly, or was in so much pain that it was too much for him to do so. Most likely both. But he kept going, using what was left of his inner strength to climb. His eyes were glassy and dazed by this point, and it seemed as if he was fighting hard to stay awake. Finally, Luffy's hand reached the top. His whole body was shaking so badly that it was a wonder that he was able to hold on to anything as he heaved his sick body up and over. Only when he was up did he open his mouth and let Sanji fall into the soft snow beneath them as he slowly looked up and stared in front of him. They looked up and there was a beautiful castle that shone in the light and seemed to twinkle as if it was made of ice itself. Luffy finally spoke. His voice was so hoarse that it almost didn't sound like his, "We're here." But even as he said it, everything around them seemed to blur and fade until he fell face forward in the snow, blacking out. His body went back to his human state in his exhaustion and the cold hit him tenfold. He could vaguely recall hearing the sounds of snow crunching around them as the memory faded and they were back in the warm night air. But he vaguely saw two figures. One was carefully turning Sanji over and opening his coat so that he could get a look at his chest, which was bruised and bleeding. The other figure was an elderly woman. Despite her aged face and thick sunglasses, from the neck down, her body appeared to be very young and she was dressed in a flowered print shirt that showed off her middle and her navel ring as well as a purple hipster pants. Luffy could only watch as she lay aside her bottle of alcohol as she examined the three of them. She spoke, her voice sounding aged but also a hint of a witch's cackle was there. "He climbed this mountain with his bare hands? That's almost 3 miles of sheer rock to go up." Luffy was shivering on the ground as she looked down at him and added, "His entire body is on the brink of frostbite." What was he thinking dressing like that for such a climb? Draw some hot water and throw him into it. The other figure, who curiously looked like a small bipedal reindeer with a large pink top hat, continued to look at Sanji's injuries and declared, "This guy's bleeding a whole lot. He's got 6 broke ribs, and a spinal fissure. Can I operate on him, doctoring?" The woman, who could only be Dr. Kureha, gently lifted Nami up to get a good look at her. When she frowned, they could tell that Nami was in serious trouble. It was confirmed as she said, "Apparently the most critical of our 3 patients is this girl. This one's dying." Dr. Kureha turned to the other and started listing a list of things to get for her. He looked back up at her and asked, "She has an infection?" "Yes," she confirmed, looking back at Nami and finishing, "and the infection isn't from anywhere on this island." Suddenly, Luffy's bloody hand shot out and grabbed hold of Dr. Kureha's arm. The two looked at him in surprise, clearly having thought that he was out. Luffy slowly turned his face towards them, trying to form words, but his teeth were chattering together so much that it only came out as short pants and garbled words. But Dr. Kureha seemed to understand as she said in a slightly gentle tone, "Don't worry, boy. I'll make the bleeding boy and the sick girl better, you can rest easy all right." Luffy still seemed to want to say something as he continued a choking sound. His vision grew darker with every second, but Luffy took one last deep breath and finally forced himself to say something, so cold that he stuttered. "Those T2 or MIF friends okay?" Dr. Kureha observed him as a smile pulled at her withered mouth. "I figured that kid. I'll save them so don't worry," she said before she turned towards the other figure. "Chopper, let's begin treatment." That was when Luffy seemed to be at peace with the thought that they were in good hands, and he let his hand fall. He was out before it even hit the ground. When he awoke, he was in a room filled with a mixture of objects and books. Judging from the stone walls, they guessed that they were inside the castle. There were 2 beds and both Luffy and Sanji were sleeping in them. Both of them were covered in bandages. Most of Luffy's body, as well as Sanji's chest, were both heavily wrapped up as the reindeer, named Chopper, lay a bowl of blood-stained wrappings on a small table next to Luffy's bed before he looked over at him. He cautiously approached the bed, as if getting ready to back away should something happen. He was looking over Luffy with a critical eye, but not as if he was trying to detect the source of a medical problem, but as if he was trying to figure something else. Just then, Luffy's eyes opened and the fuzzy room slowly started to clear and Luffy croaked out, "Hungry, so hungry." He turned his glassy eyes next to him to see Chopper there. "Need meat," Luffy said in a groan and drool was starting to form from his mouth, his teeth taking on a fang-like quality. Chopper backed away from him, KNS to the floor before he backed into Sanji's bed. That was when Sanji began to speak, almost as if he was in the middle of a dream. "Venison stew should be shimmered in a large pot for 3 hours until all the meat becomes tender. Chopper slowly looked over and Sanji was finally waking up. A vindictive smile curling on his lips as the little reindeer backed away, shaking with fear. Luffy sat up in bed, his eyes never leaving Chopper as he croaked, "Meat." Sanji then grabbed Chopper's arm. "Venison," he declared as Chopper screamed and backed even farther away as drool was cascading down Luffy's mouth, and he finally screamed out loudly as the two jumped from their beds and threw themselves at him. "Somebody help me," he screamed at the top of his lungs as he bolted. Luffy and Sanji were on each side of him like a couple of kids fighting over a toy. Luffy shouted for Chopper to stop running as he tried to chew down on Chopper's arm, with Sanji screaming to wait so that he could cook him up first. They ran around the room before breaking through the door. Suddenly they were in the next room with Dr. Kureha and Nami sitting up in a bed, finally awake. Though her eyes were still glazed over and her face was still red, she looked a lot better than she had been before. Luffy noticed that she was sitting up, and all thoughts of trying to eat Chopper had been driven from his mind at the moment. Sanji skipped over to Nami's bedside as well. Luffy cried out happily that she looked like she was all better. "Getting there, thanks," Nami answered, her voice still sounding a little weak, but she gave them both a smile. "Right," Sanji decided, clapping one of his arms, one tasty venison dish for Nami coming right up. They then looked behind them to see Chopper was trying to sneak out the door without them noticing. The moment that he felt their eyes on him, he froze for a moment before the two screamed out, "Come back." Naturally, Chopper turned and ran on ahead with the Straw Hats behind him. Onwards they went. Luffy and Sanji were able to catch up to him and were now attempting to stop him, Luffy actually chewing on one of Chopper's antlers. Mentally, Luffy cursed that he lacked the strength to simply become a wolf or another predator and take the strange deer down right then and there. But beggars can't be choosers. Sanji kept telling Luffy not to eat him until he cooked him up. But then Chopper finally had enough of fighting them off and grew big by changing his form, which actually looked more like a gorilla crossed with a reindeer, but looked almost human. The two sure didn't see that coming as he screamed out, "I am not food for you, okay?" And he gave them both a hard punch, sending them straight into the floor, and things blacked out there as their heads cracked the stone beneath them. Later, they were back in the room with Nami sleeping in the bed, and the two were finishing up some food as Dr. Kureha watched them. Luffy stood up and slammed his hands on the table as he said loudly, "You should be one of my crew. Please, old lady. We really need to have a doctor on board." Dr. Kureha raised a single finger up to silence Luffy as she asked, "Luffy? You did tell me that was your name, right?" "Yeah," he said slowly. "And did you just call me old lady?" she asked, as if making sure she heard her hearing was working correctly. "Yeah, right," he answered bluntly, "that's what I said, old lady." With a loud cracking sound, Dr. Kureha kicked him so hard that he went flying across the room and slammed into the wall, leaving deep cracks in it as she yelled out, "If I were you, I'd be a little more careful of what I say." Dr. Kureha smirked as she leaned back in her chair and said, "I'm still within my youthful 130s, thank you." "Geez, you're a tough old hag," Sanji said, and she answered him by slamming him face first into the wall, and he slid painfully down it. "Are you boys really asking me to become a pirate?" Dr. Kureha said. "That would be an incredible waste of my precious time. Besides, I have no interest in life on the sea." Luffy dragged himself back to the table, and when he got back up on his feet, they could see blood dripping down from his nose and from between some teeth. "Those are all lame excuses, it's about adventure, old woman." "Well, this one's a slow learner," she said. "Didn't I just tell you to watch what you say?" It was then that Chopper was noticed standing in the doorway, and as soon as they saw him, Sanji and Luffy's jaws dropped hungrily as Chopper's fell open in fear, literally hitting the floor. Soon they were chasing him around the castle again, with Chopper screaming the whole way. However, as the two kept chasing Chopper, Dr. Kureha eventually put an end to it when she showed up with a pair of swords and charged at them. They completely forgotten about being hungry as they screamed and ran from her. "Scary hag!" they screamed. Chopper was out in front as the duo ran right behind him as Kureha gave chase. This went on for a while, but the two eventually lost Kureha in the chase. But then the two were standing in a large room, most likely like the entrance hall of the castle. It was covered with snow everywhere. Icicles were hanging from the roof. Even the doorknobs on all the doors were frozen shut as the wind was blowing so hard that you would swear that you were outside. Sanji also asked why the castle was freezing. Luffy looked at him blankly for a few seconds, as if trying to process what he said before he hugged his shivering body, saying that he was freezing. "Not the sharpest knife in the drawer, are y'all, Luffy?" Sanji demanded as they came to the railing to get a good look at the whole place. But before they could really get to observe everything, Dr. Kureha appeared once again. She swung from out of nowhere with many sworded weapons on her back, everything from swords and knives to spears and maces. Luffy and Sanji didn't waste any time and ran for their lives as she threw them all at them. "Come back here just a moment, boys," she screamed as they dodged the weapons, an axe almost beheading Luffy as she screamed for them to stop. "You should rethink this idea of asking the old hag to join our crew," Sanji screamed at Luffy as more items went flying by. A real doctor doesn't chase her patients around a freaky snow-filled castle trying to kill them. Finally, it looked like they had been able to shake off the mad doctor as they headed to a large wooden doorway that was left wide open. Sanji pointed out the door to Luffy and they went over to it, both of them hugging their bodies as they tried to keep warm and headed over to shut it. "Hey!" called a familiar voice from overhead them, and they looked up to see Chopper standing on the balcony on the floor above them. "Stop it! Don't touch that door! Get away!" Sanji and Luffy both looked up at him in surprise. "Never mind him, let's close it," Sanji told Luffy, and they moved back to the door. "Or we're gonna defreeze to death." "That's a good point," Luffy agreed, but that only made the Chopper furious. "Stop," he screamed out. "Didn't you hear what I said?" And when he shifted into his human, gorilla, reindeer, thing form, he ripped off part of the railing as he screamed out, "Get back!" Luffy freaked out and had to jump back to avoid getting hit with shrapnel. "What is with this guy?" he screamed out in shock. "What's the heck is he so angry about?" Chopper panted angrily at them, practically acting like an angry bull as he glared down at them. Suddenly, Sanji told Luffy to come over as he stared up at the door. Luffy looked up to see what Sanji was looking at, and they saw a nest of baby birds chirping loudly on the top of the door. Sanji said to Luffy, "It's a bunch of baby snowbirds. See? If we closed the door, they'd fall." "So, that's the reason they're leaving it open," Luffy said in wonder. They stood there for a moment staring at the nest happily before they remembered that it was cold and went running back in to get out of the wind, while they had been distracted by the bict that Chopper had already left. But then Luffy paused for a moment. "Hold up a sec," he said quietly. "Yeah?" Sanji asked from behind him and making him jump. "That weird reindeer guy, wasn't he speaking earlier?" Luffy asked him slowly as Sanji's eyes widened at that as he realized that he was right. "Now that you mentioned it, I remember seeing him walking on two legs too," the cook said. They stood there frozen for a moment before they screamed out, "He's a monster." After a second, Sanji realized the irony, the direction this conversation was going, and whacked his captain over the head with a kick. "Idiot, like you're in any position to call someone else a monster. You freaky walking zoo," he admonished Luffy. Rubbing the lump on his head, Luffy seemed to ponder this for a moment before bopping a fist into his other hand and saying, "You're right." He then gained a wide smile with his mind still on Chopper. "What a cool guy, I bet he's really interesting." Luffy suddenly screamed out eagerly, "Hey wait, I know, he should join us." This leads to Luffy looking around the castle, clearly looking for Chopper, and when he went bursting through random rooms, calling out for the monster. He kept grinning the whole time until he finally found him after about 5 minutes of searching. Chopper, who had been looking through a microscope, was startled so much that he accidentally sent some of the equipment flying off. Panicking, him jumped up and caught them all. In the end, he was forced to stand on one leg, while his arms, leg, and even his antlers were balancing the test tubes and bottles. It was such a way that one wrong move would cause him to fall and everything would break. "Whoa, amazing," Luffy said, impressed. "You are cool, monster." Suddenly a wicked grin came over his face as he came forward. "But what happens when I do this?" And he did an evil thing by starting to tickle him. Chopper almost fell as he yelled at Luffy to stop it. But Luffy kept tickling him as the reindeer fought hard to keep himself from laughing. Luffy had no such problems and was laughing loudly, tears in his eyes. "That's funny." That seemed to make Chopper angry as he yelled out, "Shut up, get out of here." But Luffy grinned as he came almost face to face with him. "Come on, let's you and me be friends, please. I really do like you, you know?" Chopper's limbs were shaking worse than ever as he stared at him, his expression holding nothing but shock as he croaked out, "You, like me?" Luffy nodded to what Chopper said and added, "You'd make a great pirate." Chopper put most of the equipment down and backed away from him, holding onto a vial full of purple liquid. "Did you slip and hit your head on the ice or something?" he demanded hotly. "I don't want to be a pirate or your friend, see?" Luffy came forward, telling him that he had to become his friend and that his crew would love him. Chopper just turned and ran. "Hey, wait," Luffy yelled as he gave chase. "Why would I want to be friends with you? Are you making fun of me?" Chopper yelled back, almost childishly as he ran down some stairs, slipping and bouncing down the rest of the way. He was forced to catch the vial with his feet as Luffy laughed when he saw how he landed on his head. "I think you're the funniest guy the first no, oh yeah, we're gonna be great friends," Luffy decided firmly as Chopper put the vial down. However, the reindeer was able to escape, which led to some sort of storage with Luffy still calling out for the reindeer to come out. But he was distracted when he saw the plate of food there and he would naturally put his search on hold until he ate. "I love being a pirate," he said happily to himself as he swallowed the apples. Chopper stuck his antlered head out from behind a large crate as he watched Luffy swallow the entire plate of food. "Hey," he said cautiously, looking ready to run at first notice, "why you're really a pirate?" Luffy looked back to him. "Well, yeah, of course I am," he said before he swallowed and went on about all the awesome things that pirates did, and he definitely got Chopper's interest. As he started talking about adventures and everything they went through, Chopper was like a child being told an amazing bedtime story. And when he was done, Luffy asked, "So will ya join us?" Chopper was looking deeply tempted by the offer but seemed to snap out of it as he looked over his shoulder. "Ah, sure," he said carefully, "but first, why don't you come this way first?" "Really?" Luffy asked eagerly. "What?" Chopper led Luffy to a random room with bars on a little window and locked the door behind him. "Hey!" Luffy yelled, shaking the bars, "what's the big idea?" "Now you can't pester me," Chopper declared as Luffy glared down at him with a heavy frown. "I just want you to join us," he pouted like a little kid who had been told to go to his room for being bad. "That's exactly what I mean by pestering," Chopper yelled and Luffy began to whine for him to keep joining. "Shut up. Now you stay right there," he finally called, holding up the key for Luffy to see. "You were injured too, you know. So just settle down." As he turned, he didn't notice Luffy stretching his hand, now in the form of a sloth's paw, out to grab the key. As Chopper walked away, he noticed that the key was gone and his face turned a little blue as Luffy opened the door, a grin there as he held it up. "Get away from me," Chopper yelled out as he ran once again, and Luffy was right after him, telling him to come back. Luffy continued running, calling for him to stop running, and to everyone's surprise, Chopper did stop so that Luffy slid and crashed into the wall. But Chopper didn't pay any attention to that as he stood there, shaking and his eyes wide. "That scent," he said, anger in his face. Luffy looked up from the hole he made in the wall and Chopper only said one word, "Wapple." With that, Chopper bolted once more but with much more urgency than earlier. In fact, he was so fast that Luffy couldn't even keep up with him while in his human form. Luffy sighed at losing sight of the cool monster again before his face lighted up as his head took on the form of a bloodhound. Sniffing the frigid air, Luffy easily caught Chopper's scent and went running after it. Soon he was standing outside the castle. Chopper and Doctorine were facing down Wapple and his two flunkies on either side of him, and even that strange hippo that Wapple rode on was right behind them. "This castle is no longer yours, Wapple. It saw enough corrupting and misery during your reign. Leave," Doctorine yelled, not showing the slightest bit of fear as she stared him down. "Not just here. The country too. Drum Kingdom has already died out, moron." "Wait," yelled a voice behind them, and looked back to see that Luffy had come running out of the front doors, his eyes burning fiercely. "This guy is mine." Luffy ran past them all, straight at Wapple, who looked stunned at his appearance before Luffy slammed his fist right into his face, sending him flying. Everyone was gaping at him, even Doctorine and Chopper, their jaws wide open. However, Waple's flunkies had grabbed hold of Waple's feet and were holding onto him as he dangled from the edge. "I'm really sick of you guys, you know that?" Luffy said angrily as the wind continued to blow around them all. "What's your problem? You were getting in our way before we even got to this island." The last time I ran into you guys I couldn't fight cause I had to protect my friends. Luffy continued. His eyes shadowed over again before he looked up, grinning wildly. But now, you guys are gonna get it. How dare you? Kuromarimo cried out in outrage, kneeling on Wapol's side. Do you know who you attacked? This ain't no lowly commoner. This is Wapol, the king and absolute ruler of Drum Kingdom. That's right, Chess yelled, also sounding outraged. Show some respect, he's this country's monarch. How dare you do such a thing to his most excellent of excellences? For shame. Who cares? He ticked me off, galling his cheeks out and sticking his tongue out at them. Dr. Kureha asked if Luffy had run into Wapol before, though it sounded like she already knew the answer. I sure have, Luffy yelled, looking at her. He's that annoying big-mouthed pirate. What did he do? She asked, and he went into a rant about how he attacked him and his friends as well as ate part of their ship. He was yelling, stamping his feet in the snow, and declared that he was going to take him out. But before he did, Sanji asked if he was cold without a coat. Luffy blinked as if he just realized something. Hey, Luffy yelled, looking back at Wapol and yelling out, did he say he was a king? But I thought he was a pirate. Took you long enough, Sanji yelled at him. It was so funny hearing them talk when their enemy was here that they all completely ignored Wapol when Luffy finally said that it was cold out here. You really are an idiot, Sanji said in annoyance. Quickly, Luffy bulked up into his polar bear form, much to the two doctors' shock, but they quickly got over it due to the more serious threat grabbing their attention. The two lackeys suddenly went to strike at Dr. Kureha, but Chopper in his human form went to intercept them. This was a front, however, as Wapol suddenly appeared from behind the two with his mouth open wide. They all cried out in shock to see that Wapol was now chewing on Chopper like he was a stick of gum. Sanji screamed out, Luffy, grab my leg from there. Leg? Called Luffy before he smiled, understanding what he wanted him to do. Sure, he quickly reached out paw and grabbed onto Sanji's outstretched leg. Like this. Yeah, just don't let go, Sanji yelled as he prepared to swing his leg. Sanji swung his leg out and sent Luffy flying towards Wapol. Spinning like a torpedo, Luffy hit Metal Mouth right in the stomach. And not only did this cause Wapol to spit Chopper back out, but he was hit so hard that when he flew back and knocked into his hippo it was sent, not just off the mountain, but flying into the sky. It flew farther and farther away until it was a little star in the distance, and was gone. Chopper was thanking both of them for saving him, praising how amazing they were. Luffy merely nodded as he looked back to Wapol. Whoa, Big Mouth is still alive, but his hippo is heading towards the moon. Wapol grew furious that they had dared to attack him. That's right, I'll show them the Munch Munch factory, he declared, and Luffy seemed impressed that he got back up to his feet. Wow, he even said, he stood up. Yeah, but how? Sanji asked him, letting him go, and from the look of things decided to deal with Luffy later. You hit him pretty hard. Guess, he's tough, Luffy suggested. Wapol then turned to Chess and demanded that he remind him what he ate today and in the order. Chess pulled out a notebook and recited them all, which included 2 cannons, some cannonballs and gunpowder along with a cottage. And you thought I ate a lot, Luffy said to Sanji. You do, Sanji reminded him, but this guy's a bigger pig than you. Wapol slowly began to transform. Wapol transformed into a house complete with doors, chimney, and windows included. He also transforms his arms into cannons, and a large door in his stomach. But then, once he was an overgrown house, he turned and swallowed his 2 henchmen. That's so mean, Luffy yelled. Wapol moved around awkwardly for a moment, as if doing some kind of dance, with steam coming out of the cannons and chimney on his head. But then the large door on Wapol's stomach opened up and stepped out a new creature. Now, they had been expected to see something like a horrible monster, but instead. So lame, Sanji deadpanned as the 2 morons seemed to just be piggybacking on each other, with only their outfits merged. Luffy, however, was staring at them with a freaked-out expression. Oh come on, Sanji groaned, wishing his Rock for Brains captain would stop getting excited over every little thing. As Luffy and Sanji stared at it, Doctorine suddenly started speaking, warning them that they shouldn't let their guards down. She explained that it was because of these 2 the citizens couldn't stand up to them and how the doctors were all exiled. Article 1 of the Drum Kingdom's constitution, those who don't do as the king wishes will be put to death. That's the #1 law of this country, Wapol declared, pointing one of his cannon arms at them. He then yelled out that they broke that law and he was going to punish them for their crime. But he added that he was going to get rid of the quack's flag on the top of his castle. They all looked to the tallest point of the castle and spotted it as well. Though it was hard to tell at this distance, it was a pirate flag with the skull and crossbones. However, what made this one special was that it also had cherry blossoms. Wapol held up his cannoned arm and fired. "It's time to take that flag down." "No!" Chopper gasped and stared up in horror as they watched. As if in slow motion, the cannonball struck the flag and exploded. As the smoke cleared, the waving flag leaned and started to fall, barely hanging on. Rage was building up in Chopper as Luffy also stared up at it. "Hey reindeer, that flag," he began, but he stopped as he looked at past Chopper's expression. A strange understanding seemed to cross Luffy's face as if he suddenly knew what the problem was. Chopper lost his temper completely as he turned with tears burning in his eyes and he ran at Wapol. "How dare you! You attacked Doctor's flag, you creep!" Chopper ducked under Chesmarimo's legs and shifted to his human form, or heavy point, as he jumped up to grab hold of Wapol by his face. But what got them all was the fact that he was crying. "Doctor, he tried to save even you," Chopper yelled in tears as he held up his fist, looking ready to attack him, but he froze, as if he couldn't bring himself to do so. Chopper choked out, I won't hurt you if you just leave this country forever." Dr. Kureha started yelling at him, looking both angry and worried as she told him that he couldn't trust a word what he said. But as they argued, Luffy spread his arms out, turned them into wings, and was now rocketing up to the castle to grab hold of the falling flag. Chopper didn't notice any of this as he turned back to his mentor and stuttered out, "But, Doctor said." Wapol's worried face turned into a smug smile and pointed his cannoned arm right in his face before he fired. "Chopper, Doctorine," yelled out worriedly as Chopper slowly fell back. His eyes rolled into the back of his head, blood falling from his face and his fur burned. "Hey, big mouth!" That got everyone's attention as they stared up. Luffy was standing on the top of the tower. He had ripped off one of his sleeves and used it to tie the flag back up. Wapol called up furiously at him. But Luffy wasn't fazed. "You guys weren't real pirates. You were just fake ones, weren't you?" he screamed back down at him angrily. "That's why you don't know what flying a pirate flag means. 'Cause you were just a bunch of fakes who didn't risk your lives." "What a pirate flag means, Straw Hat." Wapol began to laugh as if Luffy had asked the simplest question in the whole universe. "Don't make me laugh, flags have no meaning." Luffy glared down at Wapol and shouted out, "If you think that, you're dumber than you look." "Listen, pirate flags stand for something, big mouth," Luffy said, holding onto the pole of the flag as it blew in the strong wind. "They're not raised as some kind of joke." "Moron," Wapol yelled, clearly not caring about anything that he said. "The only joke is that I've let you live as long as I have. Since you dare put that flag back after I knocked it down, it's time I deliver the punchline." He raised his cannon arm once again and Chopper screamed for Luffy to look out. But even as Wapol fired and sent the cannonball flying at him, Luffy stood his ground and refused to move. "Do your worst. You can't break this flag." Luffy prohe ball hit and there was an explosion. Wapol just laughed smugly, grinning cockily as he said, he was blown to pieces. When the smoke cleared, Luffy was still there, holding the flag high, not caring about the fact that he was burned black. Wapol stopped laughing and the spectators didn't blame him for that. "I told you, you can't break it," Luffy yelled as he continued to hold the flag up. "What? How'd he do that? That's impossible," Chesmarimo cried out. "I have no idea who this pirate flag originally belonged to, but it doesn't matter," Luffy declared, still holding the flag as he glared down at them all, ignoring what they said. "A pirate flag is someone's pledge to risk their life. It's not something to laugh at." Even as they stared up at him, Luffy then screamed out at the top of his lungs, "It stands for something that you jerks will never understand in a million years." Wapol and Chesmarimo looked like they were being hit with a wave of power. Luffy's anger was so strong that they could all feel it. Before their eyes, they felt as if the entire animal kingdom was bearing down on them. "It won't break, ever," Luffy shouted out, glaring fiercely down at them, because the skull on it is a symbol of faith. He then turned to the other group. "Hey, reindeer," Luffy suddenly shouted down at Chopper. I'm going to kick these guys' butts for showing your friend's flag disrespect. You in? Chopper blinked, startled before he asked, me. You idiot, Wapol yelled, getting his anger back. You just don't get it, do you? Alright then, since you feel so strongly about that flag, I'll destroy you along with it. He looked like he was about to fire once again, but Sanji was finally about to step in. I don't think so, Tubby, he shouted out, but just then there was a loud cracking sound and he screamed in pain, almost falling. Looks like your backbone gave out, Dr. Kureha informed Sanji from behind just as grabbed hold of his ribs in agony, and she added, your condition will continue to worsen if you keep moving. So, stop, she screamed as she ran up and kicked him hard in the back, doctor's orders. Wapol however was laughing at seeing Sanji now screaming in pain as Dr. Kureha dug her heel into his back. If you two want to fight among yourselves, then please, by all means do so, but I hope you will at least watch your friend and that flag get blown to bits. He turned his attention back up at Luffy and started dishing out threats by the time that Chopper spoke up, stop it. That's the spirit. Luffy encouraged as slammed the flag back in its place, cheering Chopper on the whole way. Encouraged by that, Chopper went back to trying to attack Wapol, but he was blocked with Chessmarimo jumped in the way and blocked Chopper's attack. Dr. Kureha watched, still having a foot on Sanji's back. Would you look at that? That little furball has more courage than a full-grown man. I'm sorry, freak, but there is no way I'm going to let you lay a single paw on our king, they declared together. Chopper changed back into his usual form as Chessmarimo looked him over. Wow, there really are some strange creatures in this world. You must be that Yeti the villagers hated and feared. They tried to kill you and chased you away, right? Chessmarimo went on to try and mock Chopper, reminding him that he lived alone and that he was a monster that everyone wanted to kill. But he couldn't understand why he was trying to save this country, and that had to be the stupidest thing that they ever heard of. Luffy watched the scene calmly as if he knew how this would all play out as he got ready to descend. Shut up, Chopper yelled at Chessmarimo. Even if I don't have friends, I can still fight for something I believe in, and as long as the flag flies, I will. Hey, that's not true, Luffy's voice called, and once again, they all looked up to him just as he jumped off the tower with grasshopper legs and went hurtling down at them. You do have friends, I'm your friend, reindeer, me. Chopper seemed too stunned to speak, his eyes wide in amazement as Luffy fell towards them. Wapol screamed in fear as he hit the ground and knocked him and his freaky fused henchmen right on their butts. Chopper screamed in worry for him, but when the snow cleared, he was kneeling in the snow, perfectly unharmed. You should be flat as a pancake, Chopper yelled in a stunned voice. Yeah, but I'm not. It'll take more than that to do me in anyway, 'cause I'm an animal man, Luffy explained, still grinning. Luffy pointing to the fused freak and asking the reindeer if he minded dealing with them. That one over there? Chopper repeated, glaring at Chessmarimo, piece of cake. Good, while you're doing that, Luffy said, looking to Wapol, who had just gotten back to his feet with a loud clunking sound. I'll deal with this one. You dare to knock me, this country's monarch, over? Wapol demanded hotly as he glared down at Luffy. You'll pay for that insult. I'm taking you down, Chopper declared, facing down Chessmarimo, who snapped back, is that so? You and what army, huh, you little freak? Freak? Croaked out a feeble voice and saw that Sanji was trying to get up, but Doctorine was forcing him to stay still. That's like the pot calling the kettle black. Doctorine kept stepping on his back and making him scream in agony as she informed him that if he kept moving around, he could lose the ability to walk. And don't worry, she added, when push comes to shove, my little reindeer can hold his own. Listen up, Chopper yelled, interrupting the fight. They looked back at him as he glared at Chessmarimo. He took a deep breath and proclaimed with pride in his voice, my name's Tony Chopper. Not freak. It's a name the world's greatest doctor gave me. He was a wonderful man, and even if he forgave you for disrespecting his flag, I won't forgive you. Luffy smirked at him and Chessmarimo stepped forward, ready to fight. But then Chopper pulled out a small yellow ball that Chopper called a rumble ball. Chessmarimo vowed that he was going to protect Wapol, and then engage a fight with Chopper. The reindeer then bid down on a rumble ball, and much to Chessmarimo's surprise, he achieved more than his regular 3 transformations, and Chopper admitted that he has 7 different forms after taking the rumble ball. Luffy was so amazed that he started crying. "Your friend," Doctorine said, noticing the tears and asked, "What's the matter with him?" "There's just so much happiness of meeting a transforming reindeer that a guy can take," Sanji answered as Wapol appeared behind him, looking ticked off at how he was ignoring him. After witnessing him evading their attacks with jump point, and blocking them with guard point, and even destroying their hammers with arm point, Chopper used his brain point to locate Chessmarimo's weak spot. After identifying his chin as the weak point, Chessmarimo was easily defeated in 3 minutes. Sanji noticed a certain Lard Butt King was missing as he barked at Luffy where he went. When Luffy realized what he was talking about, he began to look around them wildly as Dr. Kureha said, "Well, since his hippo got knocked away, I doubt that he snuck off very far." "Yeah, but how? When'd he go?" Luffy demanded. "Probably while you were drooling over those transformations," Sanji roared out. As they thought it over, they realized that there could only be one place that Wapol snuck off to. "There's not much up here, just the castle," Sanji before his eyes widened and he shouted out, "And Nami's all alone in there." Luffy went charging off with a loud battle cry. Sanji forced to crawl behind him, threatening to cut Wapol up into pieces and feed him to the sharks if he touched her. It didn't take them too long to find Old Metal Mouth, but when they did, they were startled at what they saw. Instead of the fat man they had seen before, he was now thin and slender. It was as if he lost all his weight in just a few minutes. He had Nami pinned to the floor and he was licking his lips as he opened his big, "Time to gobble you up, Straw Hat." Luffy's voice almost sang out from behind them as he cried out, "Found you!" And he kicked out with a donkey leg, hitting Wapol in the face and sending him flying back and away from Nami. Nami was breathing hard as he came up to her, now just as confused as the rest of them to how he got so thin so quickly. But as soon as she caught her breath, she gave him a hard bonk on the head. Nami's face became dangerous as she asked in a forced calm that made his voice die in his throat, "So, do you mind telling what took you so long?" Luffy gulped nervously as he tried to explain why he let the corrupt monarch get as far as he did. Nami decided to forgive him, so long as he paid interest. "Hello?" Wapol yelled out, getting their attention, "I'm still here." Luffy looked up at him in surprise and said, "Oh, that's right, I still need to kick your butt." Wapol was now standing in front of a door he declared was the room to the arsenal and that all he had to do was devour all of the weapons in there and he'd finish them all off. But as soon as he reached for the key, he noticed that it was gone and then he went running off with Luffy right on his heels. He chased after Wapol again to the upper levels and through the snow-filled castle. The upper levels were even colder than the lower ones, with snow up to their knees as Luffy went hunting around looking for Big Mouth. He finally found him in one of the towers, found with a giant Gatling gun with a hippo head decorating the cannon head that he was about to fire at him. Convinced that victory was finally his, Wapol pulled the lever, laughing as he did so. He froze, waiting to see what happened, but just as the cannon began to fire up, it suddenly died out. A little of steam snaked out into the cold air just seemed to add insult to injury as Wapol stared at it with a stupefied expression. Even as Wapol pulled the lever again and again, nothing happened as Luffy looked on, as if wondering if this was a joke or something. And they noticed why the gun wasn't working right. There was chirping going on inside the cannon's barrels and they spotted another family of snowbirds there, the mother and her chicks. Luffy smiled at the little birds before he began laughing at Wapol. "Stop it, how dare you laugh at me?" Wapol yelled, sounding like a little kid who was being laughed at. Now embarrassed, Wapol resorted to yelling at the birds as they chirped at him. "Shut up! You dare mock me too, stupid bird, I'm the king of drum." Wapol opened his mouth to try and eat the mother bird. Thankfully, Luffy stopped him by transforming his lower body into a snake and using the powerful tail muscles to grab his mouth. "Yeah, so what?" he demanded, still grinning. "It doesn't matter if you're a king, or even if you're a god. It doesn't matter if you're someone who's great, or someone who's not so great." He grinned even wider, "I'm still going to kick your lousy butt." Wapol just chuckled darkly to himself, not caring if his mouth was being restrained as he said, "It does matter, Straw Hat. Drum Kingdom is a member of the world government. Don't you know what that means? It means this is a capital offense because I'm the king." Luffy only grinned even further as he stated, "Like I said, Big Mouth, it doesn't matter. King or no king, I'm taking you down." Wapol seemed to realize that Luffy wasn't bluffing here as he started to panic, but then he grinned evilly as he asked, "Oh really? Not if I take you down first." He then forced his mouth open, Luffy's tail stretching out to keep Wapol from trying to eat him like on the ship. "That won't work." Luffy laughed as Wapol tried to free himself. "But this will." "Munch munch tongue cannon," Wapol shouted out, and he wasn't kidding around here. His tongue really did turn into an actual cannon and was pointing directly at Luffy's face. Startled, Luffy jumped back just as the blast went off. "That idiot," he let his guard down. Wapol laughed loudly, not noticing Luffy had appeared behind him and grabbed hold of his shoulders. "Well, looks who's talking," Luffy stated as he became a Lapon, and Wapol screamed in terror when he realized that he wasn't dead. Jumping up, Luffy began to spin around rapidly. "Lapon seismic toss," Luffy shouted as he sent Wapol crashing right up to the ceiling and through the roof. Jumping out the window so he was outside, Luffy crawling up the tall turret that Wapol was trapped in. Luffy jumped up, right into Wapol's face, and he screamed fearfully when he saw him, tears in his eyes as Luffy said, "I told you not to mess with that flag. Now I'm finally gonna kick your butt." Luffy stretched his Lapon arms out, even as Wapol pleaded for mercy, giving him offers of status and even offering him to be Vice King. Luffy had enough and sent him flying off with his new attack, Lapon Lariat, to the face. He was gone, far off into the distance and out of sight. After the short but satisfying victory, Luffy, the newly arrived Zoro and Usopp were all standing there, pulling themselves out of the snow. Apparently, Zoro stole a coat from one of Wapol's men and he thought that he was some of his guards and tried to attack them. Luffy began speaking about how impressed he was that they climbed up here, but Vivi, who just came up from some stairs, explained about the rope car before she asked how Nami and Sanji were. Once he reassured them that they were all right, a look of relief came over her face as Zoro asked him what he was doing on the top of the castle. "Beating the crap out of that king," he answered coolly as Dalton was heaving himself up the stairs and into the cold air. He looked a real mess. He was deathly pale, and blood was dripping from his mouth, and as he held onto his chest, they could see more blood seeping through. "Oh, okay," Zoro said, looking as if he couldn't care less about the answer as Dalton looked up in amazement. "You mean that person I saw flying through the air, that was Wapol?" he asked, standing unsteadily on his feet as he came over to gab at him. You beat him?" "Yep, I sure did," Luffy said proudly as Usopp went on about fighting an imaginary condor on the way up here. "And his two henchmen? What happened to them?" Dalton went on. "Oh, well, the reindeer beat them up," Luffy answered back happily, and Dalton was looking completely lost here. "What? Those two, a reindeer?" he stuttered as Usopp's story got old quick. Luffy changed the subject by calling to his sniper, "Oh, hey, Usopp? I made a new friend. You gotta meet him. Get this, he's a reindeer." "Reindeer?" Usopp repeated, clearly not understanding what he was talking about. A look of marvel came over Dalton's face. Just then they heard some snow crunching a little bit away, and they looked to see Chopper hiding behind some trees as he watched them. "Blue Nose," whispered a voice, and he looked up at Dalton, who was staring at him. "You never gave up, did you? You still kept fighting, believing in what this country could become." He then fell to his knees and gasped out, sounding like he was crying. "And now thanks to you, Drum Kingdom it can finally be reborn." Soon, the other villagers showed up and spotted him hiding. At once they started to freak out and backed away as they looked for their weapons. Dalton tried to stop them, telling them not to shoot, as Usopp freaked out and screamed out that he was a Yeti, and that someone should shoot him. Chopper turned and began crying as he ran away. Luffy got angry and hit Usopp over his head. "Jerkface. He's not a Yeti, you idiot, he's my new friend." "That thing's your friend?" he screamed back in shock. "You guys scared him so bad he ran away," Luffy yelled as he went running after him. "I'll bring him back so that you can meet him, you jerks." He then yelled out, "Come back, reindeer. I want to introduce you to my friends." Later outside the castle, but it was night and the snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes, and the snow sparkled from the full moon that was illuminating the Doctor's castle. Usopp was busy building a snowman as Zoro watched Luffy walking around, still calling out for Chopper. "Let's be pirates together," Luffy continued to shout. "Come be a pirate with us, okay, reindeer guy?" "Come on, Luffy," Usopp said tiredly, holding the snowman's head in his hands. "Why don't you just give it up? We've been tracking him forever and he still hasn't shown up." "He's not interested in becoming a pirate," Zoro stated patiently. "You're just gonna have to accept that." Luffy turned to give them a hard look. "No," he said stubbornly, "that's not true. I want the reindeer to be a pirate with us." "Just because you want something doesn't mean it's gonna happen," Zoro yelled, losing his patience. Luffy ignored him as he went back to calling for Chopper, and he probably would have kept looking all night if that's what it took. There was another crunch of snow behind them and they all looked up to see that Chopper had finally come out and he had turned to face them just as Vivi and Nami were dragging Sanji out of the castle. Literally dragging him by his legs. He seemed to be out cold. "Reindeer guy!" Luffy exclaimed happily as Zoro and Usopp both looked up, and this time Usopp didn't panic when he saw Chopper. "Tony!" Nami exclaimed in surprise when she saw him standing there. "Hey, you gonna come on our ship and be a pirate with us, Kay?" Luffy asked excitedly and they all knew that even if he said no, he wasn't going to let it go. Chopper had his face down so that they couldn't see him and whispered that he couldn't. "Sure you can, reindeer. It's a whole lot of fun," Luffy insisted. "That's not a very good argument," Usopp yelled at him. "I can't," Chopper whispered before he looked up and yelled out, "I'm not a human, I'm a reindeer. I have antlers and hooves. See? I even have a blue nose." He paused here for breath. It seemed as if he had been wanting to say all this for years. "Okay. Maybe I do want to be a pirate," Chopper cried out, but I can't ever be one of you. I'm not human. I'm a monster. I can't be your friend and I can't become a pirate on your ship. You see? I'm just here to say, thank you." He looked like he was about to cry as he finished up and looked directly at Luffy. "I appreciate you asking me to join your ship. That was really nice, thank you." Luffy frowned at him, looking close to a pout as the Straw Hats looked at him. "I'm going to stay here for now," Chopper said, sounding like he was trying to convince himself that as he looked up with a forced smile, "But, if you wanted to, you can stop by here again." But Luffy heard enough. "Shut up," he suddenly shouted, "let's go." He screamed out, punching the air and his hat being knocked off. And, to the reindeer doctor's amazement, Luffy transformed into a half-human, half-reindeer that, while bigger than him and lacked the blue nose, was almost identical to Chopper. Suddenly, Chopper saw Luffy's image overlapped by another man who'd found him wounded in the snow all those years ago. In order to show the younger Chopper he meant no harm, he had stripped down naked in the snow to show him that he meant no harm. Now, another human was showing him that it didn't matter to him if he was a human or an animal, and that he wasn't alone. It was here that Chopper couldn't stop the tears as he burst out crying. With that, Tony Chopper became an official member of the Straw Hat Pirates. Chopper had told his new captain that he was going to say his goodbyes to Dr. Kureha before leaving. Shortly afterwards, the other members of the crew all gathered. The Straw Hats were all standing outside the castle again, only now Chopper was missing and they could hear screams of terror inside the castle. "What's going on?" Zoro asked, looking back to the castle. "There's a lot of noise going on inside the castle." "How inconsiderate," Nami stated, "making all that noise while those two are trying to say goodbye. That's just downright rude." Suddenly, they heard someone call out to them. Turning towards the castle's entrance, they saw that Chopper was pulling a sleigh behind him and was being chased by Dr. Kureha, who was swinging around a heavy spiked ball, and looking like she was trying to kill him with an insane look on her face. Chopper screamed at them to get in the sleigh and that they were going down the mountain. They jumped in just as Doctoring threw the spike ball, narrowly missing them as they jumped down onto the rope that connected them to the ground and rode on through the night sky, their silhouettes against the bright full moon, making them look as if they were flying. After the entire crew was now down the mountain, near the shoreline, and they could see the Drum Rockies in the far distance, so small that you never guess what a nightmare it was to climb. They were all just starting to get out of the sleigh, Sanji having to lean a little on Usopp's shoulder, just as they could hear the sounds of miniature explosions in the distance. The boons were coming from the castle and suddenly lights appeared so that they could all gasp. "Oh, cool," Luffy said next to them in awe as they all stared at it. There, on the middle mountain, it looked like it had turned into the biggest cherry tree imaginable and pink blossoms fell like snow. The mountain was enshrouded by cherry blossoms. The entire sky was lit up and millions of petals were falling around them. drifting everywhere and turning the white around them into a brilliant shade of pink. Chopper could only cry in happiness as the crew stared in wonder. Soon they were back on the Mary and sailing away from the island. The cherry blossoms still fluttering everywhere, making the whole thing seem more beautiful than ever. The Straw Hat Men were all partying, as Usopp was yelling for Chopper to come join them and Luffy was trying to get him shove the chopsticks up his nose. Sanji cheering out that, "It's a great moonlit night and cherry blossoms are in the air, how can we not party?" "They're a handful," Nami whispered to Chopper, who was trying to crawl away from them, already looking like he was second-guessing his choice to come with them. "I hate to tell ya, but your new friends are about as crazy as they come." "My friends?" Chopper repeated slowly as she nodded back at him, telling him that he would get used to it. Meanwhile, Vivi was trying to warm Karoo up. Apparently they found him in the river. And after Chopper spoke to him, it turned out that Zoro was swimming in the river and disappeared. So he jumped in because he thought he was in trouble and he got frozen in it instead. It was then that it was revealed that he could speak to animals as well, no matter what form he was in. Nami praised him for his medical skills and talking to animals. He was pretty talented and he began dancing in happiness. When Zoro asked what she meant, she explained that Dr. Kure had taught him everything she knew. "Huh?" The three of them gasped. "Impossible," Zoro said in a stunned voice, all three of them staring at Chopper. "Chopper, are you really a doctor?" "How cool," Luffy said in shock. "No way," Usopp gasped. "Really, Luffy, if you didn't know that, then what did you think Chopper was when you asked him to join us?" Nami asked irritably. "I was thinking he was a transforming reindeer monster, and that he's cool," Luffy answered, folding his arms without a second thought. "Backup food," Sanji added, and Chopper froze at that before he gasped that he left his medical bag behind with all his tools. But Nami held it up for him, asking if this was it, and he stared at it as she explained that it was in the back of sleigh, and she asked if he was the one who packed it and got it ready, but it was clear that he hadn't. The party went on, as loud and wild as it always was when they threw a celebration. Zoro and Sanji were fighting and Luffy was cheering them on as Usopp tried to get their attention as Vivi was trying to help Karoo, who was choking on food. Even Chopper was getting in on it as he put the chopsticks up his nose. "Usopp, cheat toast to our new friend Chopper." And soon they all cheered, holding their glasses up high as they sailed into the night. The small band of pirates were gathered around each other on the deck of the Going Merry. But what really grabbed everyone's attention was the fact that another man, at least they thought it was a man, was there with them. Dripping wet and gasping for breath, he was a very tall, male ballerina with heavy makeup, and a pair of swan heads on the back of his pink coat. The crew had literally picked the man up during their attempts at fishing, while using Karoo as bait. The man, whose name was Bon Clay, gasping out, "I thought I was going to die there for a minute." He looked up to the Straw Hats and said, gratitude in his voice, "Hey, you saved me, thanks. I never imagined that my life would be saved by a group of complete strangers. Thanks again." He bowed his head several times. "I'll never forget your kindness. But could I trouble you for a cup of warm soup? Chicken noodle will do." Unfortunately for the man, Luffy, Usopp, Chopper, and Karoo had eaten all the food that Sanji had carefully laid out for them all to last until they reached Alabasta. "No way!" The Straw Hats all screamed at Bon Clay. "We can't even feed ourselves," Zoro yelled, all of them looking dangerous at the reminder that they were starving. Bon Clay flirted with Vivi and began to show off his abilities to them. They learned here that Bon Clay had the powers of the clone fruit, which allowed him to become a flawless copy of someone he'd touch with his right hand, in both face and body. His antics immediately amused them, and Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper fell head over heels for his ability. To Nami's dismay, he once transformed into her and allowed them all to view her breasts. In retaliation, Nami punched out Bon Clay and clobbered the males of the ship for the free peep show. Bon Clay, however, recovered from that quickly as he began changing faces for Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper's amusement. Soon they were dancing and looking ready for another good party when Bon Clay's ship showed up and he had to leave. But as he did, his crew called him by his Baroque Works codename Mr. 2, surprising all of the Straw Hats. Even Vivi did not know who he was, despite being told about what he looked like. But what really upset Vivi was the fact that one of the faces that they saw turned out to be her father, the King of Alabasta. "That's not good," Zoro said with concern in his tone. "If he can mimic the face of a king that easily, Mr. 2 has the potential to cause a lot of trouble. Looks like we let a really bad guy get away today, huh? Usopp asked, and Chopper looked surprised as he asked if he really was a bad guy. Seems so, Nami said anxiously, walking around, and having him on the other side is not a good thing. If Mr. 2 realizes that we're the ones that Baroque Works is after, then he can use the memories from earlier to transform into any one of us. We won't even be able to trust our own friends. She then got annoyed at Luffy, who didn't seem to know what the problem was. Zoro stepped in. No, hold on a sec. He clapped a hand on Luffy's shoulder as a wicked smirk appeared on his face. Luffy's slow, but he's also right not to be scared. Just hear me out on this one and I think you'll agree. It's actually a good thing that we ran into Mr. 2 when we did, because now we can prepare and then beat him at his own game. Soon, everyone was tying bandages around their arms. Zoro finished wrapping his own arm up and said, "Just make sure you tie it tight. I don't want anyone fooled by the enemy's disguises." "What a good plan," Vivi said, as she finished tying one on Nami's arm. "We'll always know who our friends are," Nami said firmly. "Just look for the bandage on their arm." "This clone fruit guy," Sanji said, the bandage in his mouth as he finished tying his own on. "Does he really look that similar when he turns into someone else?" "You have no idea, it's the same, not just similar," Usopp said. "It was crazy. Really, you should have seen it, Sanji. He changed into every one of us. Even Nami. And we got to dance with him." But Sanji said that he wasn't the least bit interested in dancing with a male ballerina. "We know that someone with his powers is somewhere among the enemy," Zoro said, holding up his arm, "so we need to be really careful to be on our guard at all times." Chopper came forward and asked Usopp. "So," he said in a determined voice, "what should I do to help against this guy?" "Just do whatever it is you can do," Usopp said firmly. "You're not expected to do anything more, Chopper. And if you get overwhelmed, then just run." "Sounds like the pep talk he always gives himself," Sanji said, and Usopp shot Sanji furious looks. "Whatever it is I can do," Chopper said softly to himself before he looked up. "I got it," he declared, and they then heard Luffy from the front of the ship call that he could see the island. Looking up, the Straw Hats glanced up to see an island covered in sand and brick houses that could only be a town in the distance. Zoro unwrapped the bandage on his arm so that they could see the black X put underneath. So that if there was even the slightest suspicion that something was wrong, they were to take off the bandage and show them the mark. If they couldn't do that, then that would prove that they were an imposter. Sanji stated that it wasn't like Zoro to come up with something like this and stated that he must be an imposter. But when Zoro yelled that he was going to kill him, it cleared up any suspicions that Luffy and Usopp had. Luffy stood up and making a speech for them all as he held out his arm to see the bandage. "Okay. No matter what happens on that island, remember, this thing on all our arms." Just then, everyone moved in to hold out their arms as well, even Vivi and Karoo, and they formed a circle as Luffy finished yelling out, "As a sign of our friendship, now, let's land, okay?" Soon, the Straw Hats found themselves in a desert town. They could see the heat waves coming out of the ground and see the burning sun above them. On either side of them were booths filled with vendors, all trying to get people to come in close to buy something from them. Most of them were now dressed in assortment of clothes that covered them up and were clearly made for crossing the desert. Only Luffy remained in his usual clothes, and the women were dressed in outfits consisted of a blue and purple halter top with a pink shroud and a long white skirt with the top part blue and showed a lot of skin, largely thanks to Sanji's excellent taste. However, what was really attention-grabbing was that they were all running, and it soon became clear why. Smoker was there with a whole crowd of Marines right behind him. Smoker threw out a fist of smoke towards them. A wall of fire appeared out of nowhere and blocked the attack. From within the smoke, a figure appeared. He wore a bright orange hat, a dark purple tattoo on his back, messy black hair falling over a face full of freckles and a wide grin. "You again," Smoker sneered at the man. The stranger just smirked right back. "Just give it up," he called as the flames burned around his body, dispelling the smoke. "While you may have the power of smoke, mine is fire. A fight between the two of us would be pointless. It'd probably go on forever." The Straw Hats were all frozen where they stood, staring back at him. Even Zoro looked deeply unnerved by this as he'd met the stranger earlier looking for his captain. He proclaimed, "All right. It looks like the mystery man has devil fruit powers." Usopp cried out if any of them knew who he was and why he was helping them. Luffy stepped forward, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. He called out, "That you, Ace?" The now-named Ace smirked even wider as he turned to look back at him. "You haven't changed a bit, Luffy." "It is you? Really?" Luffy cried, his face still registering shock. "Wow, did you eat a devil fruit or something?" "Yeah, the flame fruit," he said, but he kept his eyes on the Marines as they started to organize themselves. "Anyway, now's probably not the time for chatting. You guys get up. Don't worry about these guys, I got 'em, go on." Smiling, a look of understanding came over his face. Luffy nodded at once as he turned and called for them all to follow him. "But, Luffy," Nami cried in surprise. "Who is that guy back there?" Sanji added. They ran on with each one of them asking who it was who just helped them, asking if they had knew him from somewhere. It was then that he finally came out and told them the truth. "Yeah, he's my big brother." "Brother?" They all shrieked when suddenly they saw it. A tower of smoke and flames spinning rapidly like a tornado in the distance was rising up from behind the buildings, and that got everyone's attention. They all stopped running to look at it in wonder. The people around them were all staring at it as well, and muttered worriedly to what was going on. They all talked about the power that Ace had before Nami turned back to Luffy and asked if he really was his older brother. "Yep," he said proudly, his eyes never once leaving the Tower of Flames. "His name's Ace." "Look, I'm not surprised to hear you have a brother, Luffy," Zoro said impatiently, "but what's he doing here on the Grand Line?" "Ace is a pirate just like I am. He left home 3 years before I did to search for the One Piece," he explained, smiling the whole time. They all stared at him, but the fireball was slowly growing bigger, and Nami reminded them all that it was time that they just kept going. The fireball suddenly billowed out and almost like an explosion as went back to running. "Wow, I'd never thought I'd run into my big brother in a place like this," Luffy said happily. He was running backwards so that he could keep his eyes up on the action in the sky here. Chopper had to nod his head to that as he changed to his walk point so that he could have an easier time keeping up with them all. As they ran, Nami cried for them to turn left, which Luffy did, but since he was backwards, he ended up going his left instead of their left and went down a different street. Luffy eventually realized that he was lost and was looking around the alleyway that he was now in, clearly not understanding what happened here. He set down the barrel of water that he was carrying and sat up on it as he stared around. "What the, oh that's weird," Luffy muttered, folding his legs and arms. "I could have sworn they were right here. Now they're all gone. Where'd they go?" Suddenly a shadow appeared above him, and that good-natured voice, with a hint of fondness in it, suddenly spoke. "Well, guess giving you a chance to escape was pointless?" He looked up and there Ace was. "Hey," Ace called from the rooftop. "Hiya, Ace," Luffy exclaimed happily, grinning widely as he jumped down to his little brother. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" he said brightly, looking at him up and down. "You could say that," Luffy said, his eyes lighting up brightly so that he looked even more childlike than usual as Ace laughed. Luffy jumped from the barrel and suddenly the two began to arm wrestle with each other. "How many years has it been?" Luffy asked as he began pushing hard on his brother's arm. I don't know," Ace answered honestly as he kept his arm steady. "But you haven't changed that much in that time. You're a little taller, but you pretty much look the same." Luffy tried harder to push Ace's arm down. "So do you. Aside from those powers you got from eating a devil fruit, you haven't changed a bit." Just as he was starting to push the arm down, he went on. "Remember when you used to sneak into the fields, eat 100 watermelons, spit the seeds out like a Gatling gun and run away?" "No, that wasn't me," Ace said as he straightened his arm. "That was you. The farmers would chase you and you'd scream like a girl," Luffy went on. "That was you too," Ace countered. They were now dead even in their arm wrestling match. I watched and laughed. Both brothers' faces were red in the face as they kept attempting to win, and it was a wonder who would give out first. In the end, it was the barrel. It broke apart underneath them and the water splashed out everywhere. "I guess we're still the same," Luffy concluded, both still holding onto each hands before they gave the other a high five. "Just like old times," Luffy finished grinning. "Wait," Ace said suddenly as he reached into his bag and pulled out a canteen of water. "Wasn't your crew looking for you a few minutes ago?" "Yeah," Luffy said as he watched Ace drink before he asked him what he was doing here in Alabasta in the first place. Ace looked surprised at the question and said, I take it you never received the message I left for you back on Drum Island? Luffy asked him what he was talking about. Ace waved his hand dismissively. Well, guess that's a no, don't worry, it's no big deal. It was to let you know that I would be in Alabasta for a few days. I'm in these waters on some business. Business, huh? Luffy asked curiously as Ace wiped his mouth on the back of his hand and tossed the canteen at him as he explained that he was now with the Whitebeard Pirates. The Whitebeard Pirates? Luffy repeated in surprise as he drank some of the water. Ace turned around to show Luffy the tattoo of the purple mark of the Whitebeard Pirates on his back. See this tattoo, that's our mark, and it's my pride. Luffy continued to drink before Ace asked a question that they didn't see coming. So Luffy, why don't you and your friends come join us? Come on, it'll be fun, what do you say? No thanks, Luffy answered bluntly, not even had to think about it. Ace was laughing. I had a feeling you'd say that, he admitted. That's too bad cause you see Whitebeard's the greatest pirate I've ever met. That's why I'm gonna help him become king of the pirates. And not you Luffy, sorry. Luffy didn't seem like he minded. He just smiled back and added as Ace just beamed at him, that's fine, so I guess we'll just have to fight then. Because I'm gonna be king of the pirates. Ace didn't seem at all disappointed that Luffy turned down the offer however. He probably knew the answer even before he asked the question. He picked up his bag and soon the two were talking with each other as they headed down the alleyway, fighting over the water. Wow, I never thought that I'd run into you here, Luffy said happily as Ace finally pulled his canteen away from him. Well, I did promise you after you got your first bounty that I'd drop in and say hi didn't I? Ace asked as he put the flask away, but pulled out Luffy's wanted poster. Just what kind of trouble did you get yourself in while I was gone? Oh, that. Luffy laughed as Ace put it away as well. Well, it's kinda a funny story how it all happened. I'll just bet it is, Ace said in amusement. He then began telling him everything that had been going on since Ace had left home. Ace looked interested in it all as Luffy then went on to explain when he left home and the crazy things that he'd been getting into since he did. Ace laughed a few times before he finally said that they should hurry up and find his friends before the Marines did. He asked if he had any idea to where they were, and Luffy answered that they were probably back at their ship. Well, that's a start. Where's it docked at? Ace asked him as Luffy admitted he didn't know. Ace sighed, as if he had expected Luffy to know better than this. Oh geez, you know Luffy, pirate ship captains usually remember where they leave their ships. Luffy laughed and admitted that he was hungry and he forgot all about it. You haven't changed at all, Ace sighed, looking more disappointed than annoyed. But it soon passed as he went and asked, so, tell me about your crew. What are they like? Who are they? Luffy beamed at that. He then began to count down on his fingers, counting them all off. Well, first there's a tough guy who carries around 3 swords. Wants to be the greatest swordsman in the world. Then there's a navigator who likes maps, and tangerines, and money, Luffy went on. There's also a cook that makes really yummy food. And we just got a doctor who happens to be a reindeer, Luffy concluded proudly. Ace listened in without saying a word for a moment before he smirked. Really, you don't say, he said in amusement. Sounds like you got a pretty motley crew there. Luffy also added, we also have a princess and her giant duck. Ace hummed. Everyone in my crew is so interesting, Luffy added animatedly. Sure sounds like it, Ace said with a smile. But I'd wager you're the most interesting one of all. But still, only a handful of people for a pirate crew, that's just like you, Ace commented, sounding like he was going to laugh. Luffy just looked ahead with excitement. I'm still looking for a musician though. Stop right there, Fire Fist. Someone yelled and they all stopped to see that a group of people were stepping out from all over. From alleyways, both in front of and behind, as well as several standing on the roofs, smirking down at them like how a cat would when it cornered a particular juicy-looking mouse. You got no place to run, Ace, the biggest man of the group, who had a long and reddish nose, declared directly in front of them. Your head is mine. It's my ticket to a promotion. Prepare to die. It's our lucky day, boys, the red-nosed man said smugly, as if promised a real treat. This'll be easier than shooting fish in a barrel. Just then, someone recognized Luffy and pointed him out, which got their attention, remarking about his bounty, and they were practically drooling at that. But Luffy and Ace didn't seem be the slightest bit intimidated as they walked right past them without batting an eye. Anyway, let's go find your ship, Ace said nonchalantly. We'll start at the shore. Then maybe we can use that nose of yours to sniff them out. "K," Luffy said without any problems. That ticked them all off and soon they were charging at them. The fight didn't last long at all. Though they were outnumbered, they were clearly having so much fun fighting together and showing off what they had learned in their time apart that it was like watching a show. It was to show how outclassed they were that neither brother had to use their devil fruit powers. When they finished enjoying themselves, and scared the remaining Baroque Works agents, they continued on their way as if nothing happened. After a long time searching, with Luffy finally able to find them by turning himself into a bloodhound, they were all back on the deck of the Mary once again, each one of them having fun. Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper were toasting everything they could think of and laughing their heads off before Luffy turned to Ace and asked, "Ace, you sure you don't want to join us? I'll be fun, I promise." "I can't right now, I'm chasing someone," he answered, though it was clear from his voice that he had no intention of joining anyway. He gulped down his drink. "He's a pirate named Blackbeard." "Blackbeard?" Usopp repeated, his eyes wide in realization. "I've heard of him," Vivi said suddenly. "He's the one who attacked Drum Kingdom." Ace leaned comfortably on the barrel and informed them, "You see, Blackbeard used to be part of the 2nd Division of the Whitebeard Pirates. He was one of my own men. But he committed the most unforgivable sin a pirate could. He killed one of his fellow crew members and then jumped ship. As commander of the 2nd Division, it's my responsibility to take care of him." "So that's why you're after him," Usopp said in hushed tones. "I came here 'cause I heard that Blackbeard was seen in Alabasta," Ace went on, "in a place called Yuba, so that's where I'm heading." "Hey," Nami said, looking to Vivi, "that's our destination too, right?" Vivi confirmed Yuba by pulling out a map and showing them. The town they had just left was called Nanohana, and they were now heading to a small city called Arumalu where they were going to dock the ship. After that they decided that they would travel up through the desert to a small oasis which was Yuba. She explained that was where the leader of the rebel army was and they were going to head there to try and talk to them about what was really going on and stop any more fighting. "You don't say," Ace said interestedly. "Mind if I tag along?" "Nami, Vivi, I'll follow you anywhere. Just tell me where to go," Sanji swooned. "Hopefully it's right off a cliff," Zoro said. "What did you say, Zoro?" Sanji yelled and Nami snapped at them to shut up. She sighed before she turned back to Ace and added, "Well, it looks like you'll be with us a little while, Ace." Usopp laughed. "We're all real happy to have you aboard." Luffy confirmed that by the thrilled look on his face. Even if it was only briefly, he and his brother would be sailing together on the seas as pirates. As he laughed joyfully, holding his tankard out, "This'll be fun," to Ace. And suddenly they all toasted. Cheers. Later, the small group of people was now trooping across the desert. Luffy, Ace, Nami, and Vivi were all wearing robes to cover themselves up as they waked on, staring ahead of them at what looked like old ruins. The city they had come to look to be crumbling away as they watched, as if it had been abandoned for the last few decades. Everything was half buried in sand and the remaining plant life were nothing more than dried husks. Vivi spoke, "This is Aramalu." It was known far and wide as the City of Green. The group was silent for a moment before Luffy said, "It was green?" Vivi looked back to them. "Take a good look around everyone," she said in despair. "This is what Baroque Works has been doing to my country." Her eyes became miserable. The people of Alabasta, this is what they had to go through. It was indeed hard to believe that it had once been a flourishing city as they looked at the dried up trees and dead plants. This entire town looked like it had been left to die years ago. "Wow, there's nothing here at all anymore," Luffy said quietly. "No," Vivi agreed, "it's nothing but a ghost town now. But up until a few short years ago it was a thriving town full of gardens, and palm trees, and lush greenery." "This place?" Zoro asked skeptically, kicking at a dead tree so that it crumbled. "Rain was always scarce here," Vivi went on, "but by saving every last drop of water and using it wisely, the city was able to make the foliage flourish. Unfortunately, that stopped when the rain died. There hasn't been a single drop of water in this country for the last 3 years now." "But wait," Zoro said suddenly and they looked back to him. "Even without rain there's still the river as another water source." "And it's close," Usopp added, jerking his thumb back to where the river must have been. "Why couldn't they have just piped the river in from over there?" "Well, the answer to that is just up ahead," Vivi answered darkly. As they walked on, Vivi explained that when the rain stopped, the capital, where the king's palace was, rained there for days and days without stopping, and it was apparently due to the work of dance powder. It was then they heard about how dance powder was created long ago by a country that had no rain. When burnt, it would emit a mist-like vapor that would speed up the process of premature rain clouds and create rain on the spot. The original creators of this powder thus called it dance powder because it would make them dance with joy with all the rain that it created. But there was one downside to this. Despite the rain it brought, the powder unfortunately caused long periods of drought in other countries. The controversy that this powder brought eventually started a war. The lives lost in this war was so great that the world government prohibited the manufacturing and possession of dance powder worldwide. It was then that they found out that Baroque Works staged an accident in Alubarna 3 years ago where some delivery men brought a large shipment of dance powder. The cart that they were carrying broke apart and the dance powder was spilled out for everyone to see. The agents then lied that the king had ordered for the powder to be Delhi city where it rained the most. A large scandal then arose around Cobra as suspicions that he had been stealing all of the country's rain. As a result, the people of Alabasta blamed the king for the drought. As towns dried up and people starved, a rebellion was stirred up. This was only proven when Vivi soon led them to what they thought was a dried-up road at first, but she explained that this had once been the canal. Somehow, it had been destroyed and the people had no choice but to abandon the city when they ran out of water. The wind suddenly blew and they could hear a loud wailing sound, like ghosts crying out from beyond the grave. As the wind continued to blow, the Straw Hats looking around expecting a fight. But Ace stated that it was nothing for them to be concerned about. But it sounds like a voice, right? Luffy asked him. Oh man, it's coming around from all sides. Usopp cried out in panic, this isn't good. There's no danger, Ace said firmly, it's just the wind blowing around town, echoing and bouncing off the empty buildings. But Vivi was now looking heartbroken. It's like the city of Aramalu is wailing over what's happened to it, she gasped out, sounding close to tears as her hood was blown off her head and her long hair was blowing around her face. The crying continued just as a mini sand tornado came flying right at them from the middle of the town. Hey, wait! Usopp yelled, pulling his goggles down as the sand hit them. What's that? What's what? Nami cried, but her voice died as she realized what he was talking about. Luffy, who was the one standing out front, his animal's sharp eyes squinting through the sand, could see it as well. The sand and wind had collected together for a fraction of a second to make out the ghostly form of a human hand. What's that? Chopper yelled in panic. The wind came wiping past them all and Luffy spun around to see the shadowy form of what looked like a striped cape disappearing into the wind. After it passed they were starting to get their bearings straight, asking what was going on. But suddenly Luffy was running ahead, looking at what appeared to be someone lying in the sand up ahead. Someone's collapsed. Nami cried out behind them. You mean there's still people living in this city? Vivi cried in astonishment as she went running after Luffy as well, but they needn't have bothered. For when they got there, laying there was nothing more than a dried-up skeleton. After the startling revelation, they were walking through the hot desert. Each one of them was moaning and groaning about the heat and the hot sun that was bearing down on them all. Vivi had sent Karoo on ahead to take a letter to her father, warning him about Crocodile's plan. After a while, Luffy got his once-in-a-blue-moon good ideas and turned himself into a camel. 1. The downside to this was that Nami basically forced the shape-shifting boy to be the girl's ride through the desert. Zoro, meanwhile, was dragging Chopper behind him on a makeshift sled. Can't go on, Chopper said, his tongue rolling out of his mouth. Can't take hot weather. I'm fine in cold weather. Usopp, who was leaning on another walking stick, looked at Chopper and said with his own tongue out, it's because of all that fur. Why don't you take off that stupid reindeer costume? This ticked Chopper off as he sat up at once and got big. What did you just say to me, big nose? He towered over Usopp. Don't make fun of reindeers. Monster! Usopp screamed back as Zoro kept trying to pull the sled. Zoro snapped at Chopper to shrink or he was going to quit pulling him. Chopper ignored Zoro as he and Usopp began fighting with each other so that he had to walk over and shoved Chopper's head down so hard that he shrunk. As they all argued, they noticed Ace walking by them all with a very strange look on his face. He was looking at them all with a slight frown on his face and a very critical eye. They continued on, barely saying anything for a short time before Usopp asked what was with all these hills. He had expected the desert to be more flat, and Vivi confessed that this desert was very old, that some of these dunes could easily reach around 900 feet tall. As they all groaned out, Luffy was starting an annoying chant of, "Are we there yet?" And soon it was a fist fight with the others. The whole time Ace was watching them. Later that night they were standing around a fire with the sun having long since gone and the clear sky was full of stars. The Straw Hats, Vivi, and Ace were gathered around the fire, under the cover of some large boulders. "I'm so hungry," Luffy groaned out as he reached for some of the food that was roasting over the fire. "Don't be such a greedy pig, it's still raw," Sanji told him, but Luffy went straight for the meat, which caused the cook to hit him furiously over the head, yelling, "Don't eat that." Once he was done with him, he then turned back to the two women and said lovingly that their food would be done soon. "The desert is truly a harsh environment," Nami sighed as they watched. It was funny to watch as they continued to argue like they would usually do on the ship. Whether it was over the food, the cold, or in Chopper's case it was admiring all the stars, they were talking and complaining about everything. "Couldn't you see the stars on your home island?" Usopp asked, shivering next to him as Chopper's eyes lit up in wonder as he stared up at the twinkling lights above him. "The skies of the winter islands are almost always covered by heavy snow clouds, so I've never been able to see this many before," he answered happily. Usopp muttering that he was way too cold to enjoy the stars at the moment. Chopper reminded him that the cold didn't bother him as Usopp was cuddling him like a teddy bear. "That's because you wear such a nice fur coat," he said, hugging him tightly. Chopper told him to back off, and soon it turned into a fight that mirrored the one earlier. "Chopper," Zoro snapped at him once he had grown and was towering over Usopp again. "Don't turn big, we gotta huddle for warmth." Luffy suddenly turned into a desert jackrabbit before jumping over, and soon Chopper was small again and they were all cuddling up, packing on top of each other like puppies in a litter. The two fur-covered crew members providing heat to the less animalistic members. Ace, who was sitting right beside the flames, who watching the group suddenly start to fight and wrestle with each other, trying to get comfortable. "I suppose you're surprised, aren't you?" said Vivi's voice, and they all looked up in time to see her walk over to him. He glanced up at her politely as she went on. "I mean by Luffy, that is. I have to admit I was a little surprised too at first." Vivi looked up to the boys all still fighting before they all finally started to drift of. "After all, he doesn't seem like much of a pirate captain, does he? I mean, normal pirate captains are respected or feared by their crews. Just this afternoon a simple drink of water led to that big fight." "Well, I think that's just the way Luffy does things," Vivi finally finished. "Took me a while to understand that." Ace only smiled, his eyes hidden by the rim of his hat as he confessed, "He's been like that as long as I can remember." Vivi looked down at him in surprise as he went on, not sounding the least bit taken back by anything she said. "He hasn't changed a bit since he was a kid," he went on, both of them watching Luffy. "He seems like a fool, but people have always gathered around him. He may be my little brother, but he has this mysterious charm about him." "I guess I wasn't telling you anything you didn't already know," Vivi said, relief in her tone as Ace chuckled slightly to himself. "He and I do go way back, you know," he said, but he smiled a little wider and looked up at her. "I appreciate it." He looked back to the sleeping pack of Straw Hats as he finished. "You thought I was worried about him, didn't you?" "Yes, but I guess my concern was a little misguided." Vivi stand near the fire and added a few more sticks to it before Ace went on. "He won't always behave like this," he said, and they all looked to him as he leaned back comfortably. "Give him time and he'll mature. Although, I highly doubt that he'll ever stop acting goofy like this." "You really think that?" Vivi asked curiously as he laughed a little. "Of course. He's my kid brother," he answered with a shrug. "This is who he is." "Well, I'm glad that there's nothing to worry about," Vivi said, smiling at him. "I wouldn't go that far," Ace corrected. "You always have to keep an eye on him. Ever since we were kids he's been making me worry about him. That child mind of his has always been getting him into trouble. He's not very bright, but he's got a good heart," Ace went on. "He'll fall for every trap you lay out in front of him. But he's just so innocent that you just can't be angry with him for long. On top of all that, he's looking for something a little more specific than most people." "He is?" Vivi asked in surprise. "You mean he wants to be the Pirate King?" Nah, Ace stated as he reached into his coat to pull out his canteen of water and took a long sip from it. That is his dream, but he's looking for something else. What's that? Vivi said interestedly. This whole time he's talked about becoming the king of the pirates, but he's never. Oh, I doubt that even he's aware of it, Ace said, wiping his mouth on the back of his hand. But I know him well enough to know. He's looking for something greater than himself. Greater than himself? Vivi repeated in bafflement. That's right, Ace admitted, putting the canteen away. He's looking for something you don't see every day, something grand, something spectacular, something that he can barely comprehend. I think that's why he loves the idea of adventures so much. He wants to be the king of the pirates, but what he wants more than that is to live life to the very fullest. He smirked again as he leaned back against the rock as Vivi turned back to the fire with a very thoughtful expression on her face. Morning appeared and the Straw Hats were still in the middle of the desert, but now the sky was lit almost on fire to the setting sun behind them. The air was as hot as ever, but a cool breeze was gently giving feathery touches to the sun-kissed skin of the pirates, light falling like liquid amber and soaking them all with its rich color. The whole crowd was watching Ace as he finished packing his things into his bag and got up. Well then. You're not really gonna leave us, Ace? Chopper asked sadly, are you? As it turned out, a man named Scorpion lured him to Alabasta with rumors that he beat Blackbeard. He was a bounty hunter after Ace, but the crew ran into his two sons and helped them to talk some sense into their dad to go home. Yep, Ace confirmed, looking back at them all. Since it's been confirmed that Blackbeard isn't in Alabasta, I have no reason to stick around. You sure? Luffy asked, looking a little sad that they had to say goodbye again after such a short time. Any idea where you'll be headed to next? Sanji asked suddenly. I have a lead to Blackbeard's whereabouts. Scorpion heard about a man who saw him out west. Guess we'll see, Ace said as he reached into the coat and pulled out a carefully folded up piece of paper. Luffy, he called as he threw it at him and caught it. Hey, do yourself a favor and hang on to that, always. But why? It's just a scrap of paper, Luffy said as he unfolded it. That scrap of paper will reunite us someday, Ace said as Luffy opened the paper to show that there wasn't anything written on it. You don't want it? He teased when he saw Luffy's baffled face. No, I'll keep it, Luffy answered quickly. Ace smiled at them all. It's perfectly natural for a guy to worry about his bundling kid brother, right? He asked as he looked over the Straw Hats, as if he knew something that they didn't. He then bowed his head politely and said directly to all of them, he might be a bit much for all of you to handle, but take good care of him for me. Ace slowly raised his head, looking at each one of them in turn, as if making sure they understood what he wanted, but a look of relief seemed to come over his face as he looked back to his little brother. Luffy, when next we meet, we'll both be top pirates. Right. Luffy exclaimed happily. The top, you and me, Ace encouraged, beaming wider than ever. They all waved goodbye to him before they all headed on their way. After much walking, with Luffy once more playing pack mule, camel to the girls, they were suddenly standing in the middle of a town in the dead of night. At least, what was left of it. Vivi gasped at what she was seeing. The wind and sand blew around them, reminding them greatly of Aramalu. Zoro noticed it as well and pointed out to them, but Vivi seemed to be in shock as she stared around them. Sanji asked Vivi what happened here and her only answer was that it had all dried up, the place once being the oasis of Yuba. They suddenly heard the sounds of a shovel and when they went a little further, they spotted a very old, dried-up man who was almost bone-thin. He looked ready to drop from overwork at any second, but he kept on digging through the thick levels of sand without stopping. Without looking at any of them, the man said, I'm assuming that you're travelers. You must be exhausted from all that time spent in that heat. Sorry, but this town is a bit dried up too. It doesn't have that much relief to offer. He looked at them to see his thin face, but still, you're free to rest here a while. Vivi covered her face so that he could see her as the old man went back to digging. He said that they didn't have too much water to spare, but there were plenty of inns that they were welcome to stay in. But when Vivi told them that they came here in hopes to find the rebel army, the old man's eyes turned hateful, throwing whatever he could find at them, telling them to just leave and that they couldn't find the rebels here anyway. The constant sandstorms dried up the town and the rebels soon ran out of supplies and moved on to another city called Kotoria. Kotoria? Vivi gasped in horror. Where's that? Luffy asked, "Is Kotoria close to here, Vivi?" "It's near Nanohana, back the way we came from," she told him as the old man stopped digging at the sound of Vivi's name. The old man croaked out Vivi's name. They all looked down at him slowly walking out of the ditch, his eyes never leaving Vivi. "Wait, your name's Vivi?" Luffy only made things worse by crying out, "Hold it, she's definitely not a princess," which caused Zoro to hit him over the head to shut up him. "Princess Vivi, is that really you?" the old man gasped, coming towards her, his hands on her shoulders as he stared at her. "You're alive, I can't believe it, thank goodness." "It's me, Vivi," the old man pleaded, "don't you recognize me? I look different, I lost some weight I suppose." Vivi suddenly gasped. "Toto? Is it really you?" Tears appeared in Toto's eyes as he nodded. Toto was the father of a young man named Koza, who was the rebel leader and Vivi's friend. Toto told her that no matter what, he still had faith in her and the king. That he truly believed that he was a good man and that he would never betray his own people before he fell to his knees and cried. He explained that believed that this whole rebellion was ridiculous, that the rebels were all just a bunch of faithless fools. He had tried to stop them many times, and that most of the country still has faith in the king as well, but the rebels won't listen to anything. Their strength, men, and supplies have reached their limit and they were now attempting to finish it all with one last attack, and were prepared to die if that's what it took. Toto finally gasped out pleadingly, "Please Vivi. You have to stop these fools from tearing our country apart." After a few moments of silence, Vivi just held out a handkerchief and told him that it would be alright. No matter what. Tears fell once again from Toto's eyes, but tears of renewed hope this time. After the group had turned in for the night, Luffy and Toto were the only ones still outside, with Luffy watching him continue to dig. "Hey old guy, there's still no water," Luffy said grumpily, "my throat's drying up. How can you stand to live here? It's horrible." "The water will come," Toto said without a shred of doubt. "The Yuba oasis still has life in it yet. The dream of Yuba cannot be beaten by a bunch of lousy sand. The king left this land in my hands and I will keep it alive. I'll dig out the sand as many times it takes." Perhaps Luffy could feel that level of willpower because he declared that he would help, and so he turned into a dog. Much to Toto's initial shock, but he quickly got over it as two of the royal guards were Zoan devil fruit users, and began digging in a random place like he was looking for a bone. And though he was able to dig at a much faster pace than Toto was, the sand that he was throwing out was landing in the hole that the old man was digging in. Toto began yelling at him to stop filling his hole with sand. Luffy looked back at him with a blank look, not getting what the problem was. "I'll never get done with you filling my holes," Toto exclaimed in annoyance. "But I'm digging just like you old guy," Luffy said innocently. "No, I'm digging holes and you're filling them up. The sand that you're digging is going into the hole I'm digging. In other words, you aren't helping," Toto yelled, waving his arms around as he tried to explain it to him. Luffy blinked at that, before he said, "Ah. A mystery hole, huh?" And then he went back to digging like before and Toto irritably gave up. Luffy continued to dig down and down into the ground, the hole looking more like a well with every second. But Luffy kept going till he fell asleep in mid-dig. Morning came to the desert in the bright daylight. Toto was there, sending them off. "I'm so sorry I didn't have more to offer you, Princess Vivi," he told her regretfully. Vivi telling him that he didn't need to worry about it, and thanked him for what he had done. But as they turned to leave, Toto quickly remembered something and pulled out a tiny barrel of water that could be worn around the neck, and gave it to Luffy. "Oh water!" Luffy and Usopp cried happily. "You found some then?" Luffy asked happily. "Yes, it was last night a bit after you fell asleep digging that huge hole of yours," he answered with a smile. "I finally reached a moist layer underneath all the dry stuff. That water there is the moisture I was able to extract from the damp sand." "Whoa, that sounds pretty complicated, but thank you," Luffy answered. "That right there is genuine Yuba water," Toto finished. "It's not much, but it was all I was able to get." "Right," Luffy said firmly, "then I'll drink it with care." They waved off to Toto and continued walking through the desert, heading back the way they came. After a few minutes of walking, however, Luffy suddenly flopped down up against a dead tree and sat there, not moving a muscle. The others didn't notice at first until Usopp finally realizes it and yells at him to get up and move. Luffy just sat there with a pout on his face as they turned back and asked just what was going on. He looked them all in the eye and said, "I quit." "Huh?" they all asked. "What's that mean?" Vivi asked. "Quit what, Luffy?" "Oh come on," Usopp said. "We don't have time to put up with every weird little mood you have right now, Luffy. Let's go." "Yeah, shouldn't we get going?" Chopper added. "Yes, we should and fast," Sanji said. "If we don't get back to that Kotoria place where we came and stop the rebellion that's about to begin, then a million Alabasta citizens are gonna start fighting and things are gonna get real ugly real quick. We're doing this for Vivi." Sanji walked forward and grabbed him by his front and tried to get him to move, but surprisingly, Luffy grabbed him by the arm and threw him aside. "What is wrong with you?" Sanji roared out, looking dangerous as he got back to his feet. Luffy glared at them all before he looked right to Vivi. "Vivi?" "Yes?" she asked softly, clearly wondering what he was going to say. "Right now all I want to do is beat up Crocodile. You understand?" he demanded, and for the first time he looked really angry and they were all taken aback by that. "Maybe we can keep the people from starting a rebellion. That won't stop Crocodile," Luffy said firmly, in a serious voice that was nearly unheard of from him. "Besides, we won't be able to accomplish anything in Kotoria." Everyone stared at him as he explained, "We're pirates. Everyone knows that things are better off without us around." "You got to admit he has a way of getting straight to the point when he really wants to," Sanji admitted grudgingly, folding his arms. "Well, yeah," Usopp admitted, "but not often." Vivi tried to counter this by telling him that it wasn't true. "You wanted it to work out so that nobody dies in this fight," Luffy went on. "Isn't that right, Vivi? None of the citizens, and none of us either. We're up against one of the 7 warlords of the sea and a million of your own people on top of that. And you still want everyone to end up all safe and sound." He looked up at her. "You'll never win that way." Nami was telling Luffy off, asking if he could at least try showing Vivi some sympathy, but surprisingly, Sanji held out his arm and told her to stop. "For what?" she demanded. "Because I think that Vivi needed to face up to the truth too," Sanji admitted. She was in denial the whole time. "About what?" Chopper asked in confusion. "There's nothing wrong with not wanting people to die," Zoro said, however. But Vivi stepped forward. She was shaking from head to foot, her face contorted with rage as she pulled her hood down, finally shouting, "And what's wrong with that? Huh? What's so wrong with not wanting to see people to die or get hurt?" Luffy looked at her and said coldly, "'Cause people die, that's why." Vivi snapped. She went right up to him and slapped him so hard that he went flying from the tree, and suddenly she was screaming to the heavens, "Stop talking like that, I won't listen to it." Taking deep breaths she yelled, "Say that again and I will really hurt you. That's the whole point of what we're doing here, don't you understand? No one here in Alabasta, not the rebel army, not the royal army, not any of the citizens is to blame for this. None of them have done anything wrong. Why should any of them have to pay for what's happened, when every last bit of it is Crocodile's fault?" Zoro's eyes softened in sympathy, but only a little bit because she was the one who didn't understand. She had lived a very sheltered life up till now, not fully understanding what a war meant. There has never been a war where no one got hurt, and someone had to slap her awake. What she wanted was nothing but fantasy. Luffy got back to his feet, and to everyone's astonishment, Luffy punched her so hard that he knocked her to the ground before he screamed out, "So you're saying it's only alright for you to die?" The Straw Hats were all stunned that he had gone and hurt her. "No, Luffy, you've gone too far," Usopp screamed as Chopper gaped at him, with Sanji rolling up his sleeves looking ready to take him out for hitting a woman. But Vivi was far from over. With a wild scream she tackled him to the ground. "Just being in this country one day and taking a look around, even I can tell," Luffy yelled as Vivi began to punch and hit him as hard as she could muster. They knew that it couldn't have really hurt him, but Luffy just kept talking, letting her take out all of her anger on him. "Tell what?" Vivi screamed, and for a moment she no longer looked like herself. It was then they realized that she looked a great deal like how Nami looked when she had failed to stop her own village rushing off to fight Arlong after he betrayed her. How she lost it completely and started to stab her own arm until Luffy stopped realizing that everything she did no longer mattered and she was like a lost child without any idea to what to do now. But Luffy could see that as he yelled out, "What this country needs more than anything. You think that just by putting your life on the line is enough to stop this from happening? Well then what is it that I should be putting on the line with it then, Luffy? Vivi yelled, looking completely mad here. What Luffy? She demanded as Luffy finally put his hands up, held back her fists as she gasped for breath. As he stopped her, she seemed to calm down as she gasped out in defeat, I don't have anything else I can put on the line, just me. Luffy finally threw her off him as he yelled out at the top of his lungs. You can at least try putting all of our lives on the line together? Aren't we friends? Huh? Vivi stared at him, completely speechless by what he said, and tears began to form. Well, he demanded in a quieter tone, aren't we friends? But Vivi couldn't answer as she began to cry as he reached over to pick up his hat that fell off during the fight. There, now you see. Now you understand. Hey, you can cry? She didn't answer as she broke down completely, sobbing opening into her hands as the tension seemed to disappear around them. Dusting off the sand from his hat, Luffy admitted, I know how much you hate this, you want to get Crocodile the most. Nami came over and hugged Vivi tightly as she sobbed. Everyone stood around them, each one knew what was coming, waiting for orders. Luffy put his hat back on and stood up, so now tell me, where can I find Crocodile? It took several minutes for Vivi to cry herself dry before she was able to choke back her sobs and rubbed her red yes. Luffy was right. She stuttered as she brought herself back to the matter at hand. Vivi grew a face full of determination. I've made up my mind now. Change of plans, she said, we're gonna go and find Crocodile. Yeah, Luffy agreed. That does seem like the quickest way to stop the fighting from happening. Nami agreed with them after everything seemed to calm down and relax. And we can quit wandering around in the desert too, Zoro added, it was beginning to get old. So where is he anyway? Sanji asked, this crocodile guy. Let's see, Vivi said, pulling out a map, and they all gathered around her, and she began pointing out where the capital Ilubarna was and the city of Kotoria. And even with eyelash, there was no way they could hope to reach it before something happened. But she pointed to another city to the north called Rainbase, which was where Crocodile would be. She told them all that if they started walking now, they could make it there before the sun went down. Soon they were walking again, but it didn't take long for everyone to start complaining and groaning, especially from Luffy and Usopp, the former from once again being the pack mule, Camel, and Usopp from the heat. Nami was getting annoyed and snapped at them to stop moaning all the time. Usopp and Luffy began arguing with Nami, but we had to walk, he reminded her. Meanwhile, Chopper asked Vivi if Rainbase had any water there, and Vivi nodded, admitting that there was no shortage there. And it was a gambling town that pretty much avoided all the fighting and the war. I guess people need places to relax, even here in Alabasta, Sanji said just as Luffy and Usopp began a game of keep away with the water that Toto gave him. And he was easily outpacing the long-nosed sniper in the form of an animal built for desert travel. Come on Luffy, just give me one sip of it, Usopp whined, isn't that why he gave it to you? The old guy from the sandstorm place gave it to me, Luffy said stubbornly, he had to dig all night just to get this much of it, we can't go drinking it like it's regular water or something, so no way. Wow, Nami called, you can restrain yourself sometimes. He retorted that of course he could before he turned to Vivi and asked how long it would be before they reached Rainbase. She smiled as she jumped down from the straw hat wearing Camel and said, hey Luffy? She said, thanks a lot. I never would have been able to make this decision on my own. Luffy's tongue rolled out of his head and said, okay then give me food. Huh? She asked as he nodded in determination. After I beat up Crocodile then give me food, I'll eat until I explode? She smiled wider. I promise I will. Finally they were standing on the dune where they could make out the city in the distance. Unlike Yuba or Aramalu, this city seemed to be green and thriving with life. Even from this far away, they could see that there were hundreds of people bustling around and doing their shopping. Yeah, Luffy screamed, double punching the air. Time to kick Crocodile to the curb. Zoro suddenly asked, so after all that's happened, are we operating under the assumption that Baroque Works knows that we're here on the island with them? That seems likely, Nami said, we did run into Mr. 2, so I think it's safe to say that they have at least some idea that we were heading to Alabasta. Who cares about that? Luffy asked in annoyance as Usopp explained that if they knew what they looked like then they had to stay low or else Crocodile would find some way to get rid of them. But naturally, Luffy didn't listen as he charged off, looking for water, and they watched him go running off. It wasn't long before they were back in the middle of a crowded street with shouting and screams going on. Luffy and Usopp were both carrying large barrels of water with Smoker and the Marines right on their heels. And they were leading them right back to the crew, again. Luffy screamed out, "Hey you guys. I think the Marines are here." Zoro yelled back sarcastically at them, "Hey, thank you, we hadn't noticed that, Luffy." "Hurry up. We can't lose them this time, men," one of the Marines yelled. "This is bad," Usopp yelled as the crowds moved back to prevent themselves from getting run over. "Baroque Works will see us if we run through the city." They could see people from all sides, watching from behind curtains in the buildings, down alleyways, even in plain sight as they ran past were all watching them with pictures. Zoro was the first to notice, "I think it's a little too late for that, Usopp." "Then it's decided." Luffy yelled and Vivi turned to stare back at him. "To where Crocodile is. How about it? Ready?" Vivi pointed ahead of them. "Do you see that building up ahead with the alligator on its roof?" She screamed. It was hard not to notice, it was clearly the largest building in this whole town, and with the large alligator on the roof, it was only too clear of where Crocodile would be. "That's the casino that Crocodile runs. It's called Rain Dinners." "I see it," Luffy said in understanding, "so that's where Crocodile is." Sanji yelled that it would be best if they split up for now. And he had a point, with Smoker and the rest of the Marines, as well as the Baroque Works members likely covering the city, it was their only choice. "Right, see ya later." Luffy laughed as they all split when they reached a building. Viv and Zoro went one way, as Sanji, Usopp, and Nami went another. Luffy went running up, jumping up on an awning and into the air. "Don't die," he added, before he looked back to Smoker and stuck his tongue out at him like how he did with those Lapons once before. As he started hopping among the rooftops with grasshopper legs, he heard Smoker's voice screaming out, "You've got some real nerve there, Straw Hat. But don't think you can run forever." After a wild chase, both Nami and Usopp found their way to the casino, and not long after that, Zoro and Luffy showed up, Smoker hot on his heels. They were just in front of the casino. It was in the shape of a pyramid with lots of typical plants and even surrounded by a lake. The front door on the other side of a bridge with Nami, Usopp, and Zoro all there. Luffy was still running from Smoker, and when he saw them there he yelled, "Hey you guys. Let's go. We W. Right behind you." Usopp yelled without any problems at all as Luffy ran past them all and they were on the bridge. As soon as Luffy realized where they were heading, he began to scream out at the top of his lungs that he was going to beat up Crocodile. As they ran, more members of Baroque Works had appeared and were shooting at them. Zoro went to deal with them and they went bursting through the front doors, though no one gave them any notice, even as Luffy kept screaming for Crocodile to come out so that he could kick his butt. Thankfully both Nami and Usopp both hit him from behind. "That's not gonna make him come out here, you loudmouth dope. Don't forget," Usopp added as past Zoro caught up with them. "We're dealing with this country's hero. You want to turn all these customers against us?" "Alright fine," Luffy snapped at them, "so what do we do?" Usopp suddenly realized that they didn't even know what Crocodile looked like without Vivi, and they realized that she wasn't anywhere in sight. "Vivi, Crocodile, come out." All three were now screaming out with Zoro shaking his head. "I got you this time, Straw Hat," yelled a voice. "Smoker," Nami screamed as they all looked behind them to see Captain Smoker running across the bridge towards them. It was largely crowded, filled with people playing cards, rolling dice, or playing the slots. The noise and bright lights were a bit disorientating after their time in the desert. "You think you can just stroll in anywhere you like and I won't find you?" he demanded, and they all turned and ran. "Oh great," Usopp yelled. "What's that refugee from an ashtray doing in a casino in Rainbase?" "If you ask me, I'd say he's developed a special affection for Luffy here," Zoro joked. Again, the people hardly paid attention to them as they ran through the room, practically trampling everything in their path. On they ran, even running right over some of the guards like they were just bumps in the road. Something else happened as they ran through the crowd. A group of people were waiting for them, leading them to the VIP room. "Did he just say the VIP lounge?" Usopp yelled in shock. "Hold on," Nami screamed out, "do you think that it's a trap maybe?" "Hey, don't these lounge things have free drinks for their guests?" Zoro asked. "It's not like we have a choice. Run for it," Luffy yelled as they barged through the doors and down a long hallway. At the end of the hall, it split into two paths. There were a pair of signs there with one saying, VIPs, and the other said, Pirates. Naturally, they turned down the path that said, Pirates, and led them to a dead end where the floor beneath them opened up and they fell into the darkness and then faded. They bout that childish ruse hook, line, and sinker. How are these guys the protagonists of this series again? They found themselves in a large room, with the windows like the aquarium, and so they supposed that they had to be under the lake. But what got their attention was that the five of them were inside a large stone and iron cage. Nami was already yelling at them all about this and Luffy just ignored her, looking pretty sick as he held onto the bars. Luffy! Zoro yelled as Smoker stood up, and when Luffy turned, he struck him with his jute, holding him down by the tip of his weapon. What's wrong? Luffy asked, his tongue rolling out once again and his eyes becoming glazed over. I feel so helpless. It's like when I fall into the sea as a human, too. The others were gathered around, each of them demanding to know what Smoker did to him. That was when he confessed all about the sea prism stone. How it somehow gives off a wavelength that is the same as the sea itself. Upon contact, the material drains the victim's body of energy, and negates their devil fruit powers, having the same effect as throwing them into the sea. The tip of his jute was made of it as well, and he explained that this cage is also built of it, which is why he hasn't broken out yet. Zoro slowly began to pull his sword out, looking ready to fight him. Nami and Usopp tried to tell them to stop, that there was no point in fighting here. That was when an unfamiliar voice, one that was deep and relaxed with a hint of mockery, suddenly spoke up. She's right, give it up. They all looked up to see a large chair its back to them. You're all gonna die together, the same voice said mockingly, so why not make an effort to get along first, the voice said. Huh, it's Crocodile, Smoker said, and the figure in the chair turned to face them. It was here that they got their first glimpse of the villain that they crossed a desert and an ocean to reach. A tall man with a wide chest, broad shoulders, and a thick neck was sitting there in the chair. He also had nape-length, deep black-purple hair which is kept neatly slicked back with a long stitched scar above his nose that stretches across his face. But what they all noticed was that he was missing his left hand, and instead it was replaced with a large golden hook. He smirked evilly at them all from where he sat, as if he had this whole thing planned out from the very start. As soon as Smoker confirmed that it was Crocodile, Luffy was growling as everyone stared. Smoker finally pulled his weapon off Luffy as he glared at him. Huh, you're every bit the lowlife CS I imagined, he stated. My, Crocodile said silkily, getting up from his chair. You're every bit the wild dog I've heard you were, Smoker. Unlike your superiors, you've never really believed I was on your side, have you? And of course, you were right. You know, Smoker, I have a feeling you'll die bravely in the line of duty, Crocodile went on. I'll be more than happy to inform the government that you put up a valiant fight against the vicious Straw Hat Pirate here. He stepped out from behind the desk and walked calmly over to them. I haven't the vaguest idea what really brought you to this country, but I'm guessing you're on your own. We both know that the government would never order you to come to this land. They have every confidence in me, a warlord of the sea. You big old bag of wind, Luffy yelled, rolling over to glare at him. You're Crocodile? He got up and grabbed hold of the bars. Come and fight me like a man, you big dumb. But his voice became slurred as Usopp yelled at him to let go of the bars. Straw Hat Luffy, Crocodile said smoothly, I congratulate you on getting this far, and I promise to dispose of you neatly and efficiently. Once our special guest of honor has made her appearance. A guest? Nami repeated anxiously. While even as we speak, my partner is on the way to fetch her, he said. And so he calmly sat down at the table to enjoy his meal, which only made everyone angry that he was so calm with them trapped like this. But with nothing else they could do, the only thing was to wait. It was ironic, even having finally met the one who orchestrated the whole mess in Alabasta, Luffy and the others with him were unable to do anything to get at Crocodile because of the cage they were in. At first, Luffy tried turning into a rhino and simply burst out of the cage, but it turned out that it was sturdily built and Luffy had to quickly go back to his normal form or risk crushing himself and his fellow prisoners. He then tried going for a mouse to simply slip through the bars, but the second he did, Crocodile said in a casual manner, "Oh, and Straw Hat? If you try to end the game before the guests arrive, I'll make sure your friends are the first to suffer and the last to die." Shuddering at the threat, Luffy went back to his human form with a pout while Nami and Usopp were pale at the casual tone the man used to threaten them with. It seemed to take forever as they waited. Crocodile merely sat at the table, enjoying his meal while Luffy and Usopp passed the time copying people with Zoro catching a quick nap. But over time, Nami seemed to grow more and more angry and finally ended up smacking the two to get them to stop clowning around. "Get serious. How can you two screw ours desperate situation?" she yelled. "Well, we can't get out, so what else is there for us to do?" Luffy demanded. "The fact that we can't get out is the reason it's so desperate," Nami screamed out. "If we don't do something soon we're gonna wind up dead." "And why are you sleeping?" She turned to Zoro and knocked him awake. Crocodile seemed to be growing tired of their talk and looked to her as he said, "You're certainly a high-spirited young lady." Nami smirked back, telling him that he better enjoy it while he could because as soon as they got out of this cage the boys were going to beat him bloody, which Luffy yelled out confidently. Crocodile didn't seem the least bit concerned. "Your crew members seem to put a lot of trust in your talents, Straw Hat Luffy," he said in amusement. "How foolish. I think trust is completely unnecessary." "Who does he think he is, sneering at us?" Nami demanded as Usopp tried to tell her not to say anything she'd regret before she made him angry. "Crocodile!" yelled a voice above them, and up on the stairs were two women. Vivi and Miss All Sunday. "Vivi!" the ones in the cage called. "My humble greetings, Vivi, Royal Princess of Alabasta, I mean Miss Wednesday," Crocodile said mockingly, leaning back in his chair. "I compliment you on evading all our assassins in order to get this far." Vivi was shaking in rage as she glared down at him. "You have no idea what I'd do, or how far I'd go to see you dead, Mr. Zero," she whispered, her voice trembling before she snapped, much like how she did at the desert when she smacked Luffy. "I wish you had died in your cradle, you monster," she screamed as she charged at them. The ones in the cage screamed at her to let them out instead, that she couldn't take him on her own, but she ignored them as she pulled out her weapon. She threw it, striking his head as he had causally stuck a cigar into his mouth. At first it looked like she had done it, for his head was gone. "Not gonna work," Smoker said, and the rest of Crocodile's body had turned to sand, spinning around like a small tornado, and his body, still missing his head, appeared behind Vivi and grabbed hold of her. "Feel better?" he asked discourteously. "As a native of this country, you should surely know that I have the power of the sand fruit." Crocodile's head suddenly reappeared and he asked something that made them all feel cold. "Want to become a mummy?" Luffy began screaming at him to leave her alone, warning that if he hurt her he'd have to deal with him. Crocodile forced Vivi to sit in the chair opposite of him. "I trust you'll be comfortable there," he told her. "I must say that your timing is perfect. The party is about to begin, isn't that right, Miss All Sunday?" "Party?" Nami asked as All Sunday pulled out a watch. "It's exactly noon right now," she said softly. "Time for Operation Utopia." Luffy asked what this was about, but Crocodile just laughed insanely at that, looking back to Vivi. "It will mean the demise of the Kingdom of Alabasta, Miss Wednesday," he said. "I'm going to wipe it off the face of the map as if it never was. All people, great and small, will be sucked into eternal darkness as they writhe in agony. Let Operation Utopia begin." Crocodile laughed darkly at his sick and twisted plans. Vivi struggled against the ropes that now bound her to the chair, demanding to know what he was planning on doing to Alabasta. She let him know that if he planned on killing her father, he'd be dead before he could even get close to him. But he didn't seem bothered by that. Instead, he let her know that he didn't think that her father was even worth killing, and instead he was going to let him face something crueler than death. Vivi demanded to know what she was going on, screaming that he'd tell her what he was planning. Crocodile smirked and confessed his whole plan to her. How he planned to finish this country once and for all. He had his agents kidnap her father, and when Mr. Two disguised himself as him, he was going to have him attack the citizens, believing that the king had betrayed them. Here, the rebels would have the motivation they wanted. They would soon storm the capital, and that would be the end of it all. He laughed again as they all glared at him. "Well, do you like it?" Crocodile asked her, as if asking for her option on this whole plan. "The operation you once participated in has now reached fruition. If you listen closely, I'd wager you can hear the howls of the kingdom." And they all screamed the same thing: "Protect Alabasta! Protect Alabasta! Protect Alabasta!" SSSSSTTT2PPPPPIITTTTT. Vivi screamed out, sounding close to crying again. How are you so cruel? Crocodile only chuckled. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? Their love for their kingdom will be what destroys it. That was too much for Luffy. He charged at the cage again and was now attempting to break it apart with his bare hands. Is he stupid? Smoker suddenly asked Zoro in the background. Didn't he hear what I said before? I'm sure he did. He just doesn't care, Usopp said knowingly. Besides, he's too angry to think logically at this point. He's definitely stupid, Zoro admitted, a smile on his face. But that's also the reason he's our captain. Why else would we keep him around? Nami said scolding, though they all knew that she didn't mean a word of that. Crocodile, Luffy snarled. I am so gonna kick your butt. You know what? Crocodile said, as if bored. I've had to make so many moves to be able to get to this point. The sabotage to inflame the citizens, manipulating the royal army. He looked back to Vivi. Do you have any idea to why I go to such lengths? To destroy this country? As if I'd understand anything inside your foul mind, Vivi snarled. Vivi suddenly knocked her own chair over. Usopp and Nami called worriedly to her as Crocodile looked down at her. Well, what are you trying to do, Miss Wednesday? Stop you, she said fiercely. I'm gonna stop you, there's still time, if I can just get to Alubarna east of here. She dragged her body across the floor. If I can get there before the rebel army, I may be able to stop them. I'll never give up while there's a chance. Crocodile only chuckled. Somehow I'm going to stop you, Vivi declared, glaring fiercely at him. Just watch. You won't get away with this. Amused by this pathetic attempt, Crocodile told her that he and Miss All Sunday were about to meet her father in Alubarna themselves. But before he left, he held up a small key. The key to this cell? Luffy yelled. Hey, give it. Crocodile merely smiled as he let the key drop as Vivi struggled with the ropes. She was able to rip them apart just as she made a wild snatch, but it was too late. Crocodile opened up a trapdoor and the key fell down a long shaft. It won't be too long until the rebels and the royal force begin their battle to the death, Crocodile said. Even if you hurry to Alubarna from here, who knows if you'd make it in time? He turned back to her. To stop the rebellion you'd need to leave at once, Miss Wednesday. Will you do that? Or will you try to save your friends instead? It's your choice, but if you chose the latter, it doesn't help that I accidentally dropped the key into the banana gator's den. Vivi gasped as she looked down the hole. Banana gators. What are those things? Luffy called, before he shouted, pointing to the window, look out the window, there's an alligator growing out of that banana. And as they looked, Usopp shrieked at the giant gators with banana-shaped growths on their heads. Gators so big that they could have easily swallowed a human in one gulp. In case you haven't noticed, that's not the only one, Nami screamed in panic. It looks like we're in an aquarium, Usopp yelled, sounding scared out of his mind. I hope we're not the fish food. What weird bananas, Luffy said to himself. How can you think that? Usopp yelled at him. But Vivi gasped in horror as she continued staring down the hole. What now? Luffy called worriedly. Vivi, what Hana Gator swallowed the key to your cell, she cried. Well then go down there and make it spit it out, Luffy yelled as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Vivi looked up and yelled back that she didn't stand a chance, explaining that banana gators were so strong and dangerous that they even preyed on sea canes. Sorry, Crocodile said, not sounding sorry in the slightest. You might have had the key if I hadn't accidentally dropped it. And now there's no telling which one of my pets swallowed it. Crocodile started to lead through a hallway behind them, one made of glass, and they could get a full look at least a dozen gators. Explaining further that Crocodile decided to flood the room they were in, so he presented Vivi in front of Luffy and the rest. The choice between getting to Alubarna in time or saving Luffy and those with him before the room completely filled with water in 1 hour. As Crocodile was explaining this challenge to Vivi, he ended up laughing at the rebels and about Toto still digging away his life in Yuba. It was then that he confessed that he was the one causing the sandstorms as well as the drought to drive the people here insane. Vivi's face was livid. I will kill you, she shouted. He just turned and headed through the door as the water began pouring into the room while Miss All Sunday said he was receiving a call from a Mr. Prince. Usopp freaked out at the sight of it, screaming for Vivi to help them and that he wanted to live a lot longer than 1 hour. Zoro then snapped at him to calm down, but Usopp was past hearing, screaming that they were going to drown like rats if they didn't get out. Vivi meanwhile was left to defend herself against the banana gators that started to enter the room. "All right, now that jerk is gone," Luffy said in relief before scurrying out of the cage as a mouse, going back to Vivi's side, and becoming human once more. Quickly knocking several of the banana gators out that got too close to the princess. Sadly none of them having the key, he turned and focused back to where his friends were being held. "Now, I'm gonna tear that cage apart," he declared as he turned around, becoming a stegosaurus as he did so. Winding back his spiked tail for a massive blow, Nami and Usopp cheered their captain on. However, much to their shock, Luffy wasn't even able to make a dent in it. No matter what form he used, whether it be dinosaur or modern-day animals, he couldn't make a single scratch appear on the cages. While Luffy knew he had some forms that could possibly break the cage, they were just as likely to hurt his friends in the process. Also, every blow to the cage made Luffy slightly weaker as the sea prism sapped at his strength. "The cage is too tough," Usopp screamed, looking ready to start bursting out in tears. "I didn't even dent it," Luffy screamed dejectedly, just as Smoker spoke up, in a surprisingly disinterested voice, as if he couldn't care less to what was happening to him. "We're all about to die," Usopp snapped at him loudly. "How can you just sit there like that? You should be trying to get out of there too," Luffy added just as angrily. But rather than answer that, he asked a question. "Tell me something. How much do you guys know? What exactly is Crocodile after?" They all looked surprised at the question, and then Smoker went on to talk about Miss All Sunday, or her real name Nico Robin, about how the government had been after her for about 20 years and about her bounty. He also admitted that if those two are planning something, and if they aren't stopped here, there was a chance the whole world could get dragged into this. Luffy ignored him, claiming that he didn't need any other reason. He was still going to kick Crocodile's butt no matter what. "I see," Smoker said in a skeptic voice to Luffy's declaration. "So, how do you intend to get out of here? Or do you plan on leaving your crew members behind in order to chase down Crocodile yourself?" "Watch what you say, you jerk," Luffy growled angrily, but then screamed as they were all beginning to freak out again at the ever-rising water. Just then, several more banana gators were able to climb over their out-cold fellows and started to converge on Vivi and the slightly weakened Luffy. Just then, a familiar voice spoke up. "It's really impolite to make a lot of noise at mealtime like you were doing. I'll teach you to behave." And then one gator was suddenly flying. The impact of the kick was so great that the water seemed to part around them. Bad manners kick course. Sanji looked to the large dent in the gator's stomach and was out before it hit the floor. "Hey guys," he said, looking to them. "Been waiting long?" "Yay. It's Mr. Prince, we're finally gonna get out of here now." Usopp and Luffy cheered together, doing a kinda jig, tears of relief in their eyes. "Thank you," Nami gasped in relief as Zoro snapped at him to hurry and find the key. But Sanji was once again swooning at Nami, asking if she loved him yet. Sure," she said, though it was clear from her tone that she didn't mean a word of it, "and I'll love you even more if you hurry up and open this cage." Sanji turned back to the gators that were crawling up into the room in droves. Each one was baring their teeth at him as he turned back to them all calmly. "More dinners with bad manners, huh?" Sanji raised his foot, looking ready to fight them all. He was claiming to take his time for going after Nami. Usopp was screaming that they didn't have time for chivalry and to hurry up and take them out. Minor surprise came when Smoker helped them out by telling them that the third gator that just came in was the one with the key. "Hey," Luffy said, looking back at him. "How do you know that, Smokey?" "Guess your ears aren't as big as your mouth," he snapped back. "Isn't that one's growl the same one who swallowed the key?" Luffy and Usopp stared back at the gators, hearing their growls, and Luffy admitted that he couldn't really tell, as he wasn't focusing on it at the time. Sanji took the Marine's advice and went straight for that gator, and when he did, something large, round, and white came spitting out of its mouth. A large, perfect round ball came bursting out and hit the floor, splashing water everywhere. They found out what it was very quickly. Everyone got a shock when the egg suddenly cracked open and Mr. 3 was there, looking as dried up as a mummy, and he dove his face into the water. "Yes. Water at last. It's a miracle," Mr. 3 gasped out. Mr. 3, who was drinking all the water around him to rehydrate himself, He didn't even notice them as he recovered and began talking to himself that after Crocodile fed him to the gator, he used his powers to create the wax ball and survive. That was when he noticed something attached to the wax ball and picked up the key. The two in the cage were yelling, trying to reach through the bars to grab it, and he freaked out as soon as he saw them. Obviously still having traumatic flashbacks to what happened at Little Garden. They could see the stunned look on his face change slowly as he put two and two together. "Now I see what's happening here," he said, an evil smirk uncurling on his face. "Mr. 3, I presume?" Sanji said, stepping up to him, and Mr. 3 jumped in shock at that, demanding to know how Sanji knew who he was. "Well, your hairstyle kinda gave it away," Sanji answered back, holding his hand out to take the key. "I'll take the key, toss it here." "Sure thing," Mr. 3 yelled with a toothy, malevolent grin. "Here it goes." And then he tossed the key as far away as he could. They all watched in horror as it went flying and landing in the water, right in the middle of all those gators. "I don't know who you are," Mr. 3 said, turning back to Sanji, still cackling insanely, "but if you want the Straw Hats free, you're no friend of mine. Good luck. You'll need it with all those alligators around, trust me, I know." "Jerk," Sanji snarled, looking ready to give him a beating. "Better find it soon," Mr. 3 taunted them, "that water's rising." And he wares were all yelling out, looking desperate now. Nami screamed out that they were almost out of time. "Lousy, good-for-nothing wax guy," Sanji hissed. But Usopp suddenly cried out, "Wait a minute, Sanji. He might be good for something. Like using those wax powers to make a key." Sanji grabbed hold of Mr. 3. It wasn't hard for him to convince him to help them out. Sanji beat him to within an inch of his life before he let up enough for Mr. 3 to turn his finger into a wax key and opened the door. "Nice work, Candleman," he said. "Now there are just two more things to do." He planted a note to Mr. 3's chest. Mr. Prince was here, and then kicked him hard enough that he went flying against the wall and knocked out. Everyone was piled out of the cell, and Sanji said that they had to hurry because he didn't know how much more time they had before Crocodile came back. Nami agreed, saying that they had to hurry and stop the rebels before they reached Alubarna, and that they should be able to get out through the hall that Crocodile was about to take before. But Vivi cried out that the hall was filled with banana gators. Not that they had to worry. The newly recovered Luffy and Zoro had just taken care of them all. "That's it," Luffy yelled out, practically roaring with energy. "I can't take on hundreds of those WERID bananas." "Well," Nami said, as they stared at them, "that's problem solved." Vivi turned away, suddenly crying in shame after seeing how easy they took care of them all. "And I had so much trouble with just one of them." Usopp was trying to comfort her, saying that she shouldn't compare herself to their insane strength, but that's when things got worse, as it always did. The walls all cracked and broke apart, and as the water came rushing towards them, they were soon bombarded with water. Luffy was yelling something at Zoro, but the others couldn't hear him over the roar of the waves. Soon they were all outside the casino. They were all a little taken aback by how low the sun was. They were in that cage for longer than they thought. And now they were at the very edge of the lake. Vivi, Nami, and an out-cold Usopp were riding on Luffy's back as he took the shape of an orca. Soon after, Sanji surfaced as well and spat out a mouthful of water. Sanji got up as the girls yelled at Usopp to wake up and help them to pull himself out of the water. Zoro finally came up, but to everyone's shock, he had Smoker with him. Sanji spotted them and began to tell the swordsman off for doing something like that. That he was their enemy and he should have just left him down there. That was when Zoro snarled back that he didn't want to do it, so he should just shut up. "Whatever," Sanji said, "we gotta get moving, guys. We've lost too much time already. Vivi, can we still make it?" "I don't know," Vivi admitted as she wrung out her robes. Sanji then turned to Nami and asked if she still had the perfume and asked to put it on. "Roronoa!" screamed a voice, and Smoker had turned his jute to Zoro, who blocked it with one of his sword. "Why did you save my life?" he demanded loudly, looking ready to fight him then and there. Zoro glared at Smoker and told him the whole truth. That seconds before the room was destroyed, Luffy had told him to go back and get him despite his protests. Smoker pulled his jute back as he registered what he said. "All I did was follow my captain's orders," Zoro said coldly. "That's it, so wouldn't read too much into it if I were you. It was one of his crazy whims, pay him no mind." Smoker put his jute back onto his back and asked, "And you wouldn't have any gripes with me carrying my duties and arresting you, right?" "See?" Sanji demanded. "I knew it was a bad idea. This is what you get for saving a marine." Usopp and Luffy were getting back to their feet, yelling out about getting to Alubarna. That was when Luffy noticed Smoker and turned to face him, looking ready to fight. "You want some? Bring it on?" Luffy yelled as Usopp begged that they just forget him and run for it. There was a very tense silence as Smoker looked to them all. For a moment they thought for sure that he going to just ignore what they did for him and try to capture them, but whether it was because they had saved him, or because he knew that they had a bigger issue with Crocodile to deal with, he finally answered. "I should, but you just saved my life," he said quietly just as the sounds of his men could be heard. Smoker just looked at them long and hard before he slowly closed his eyes. "Go," he said, and they looked at him, as if wondering if they heard him right. "This is the only time I'm letting you straw hats off, got it?" Smoker added, as if to make sure that they didn't read too much into this show of mercy. "When we next meet, it's gonna be as enemies." Everyone stared at him. Some of them even broke out into smiles as Sanji declared that was their cue to get out of here. The others all ran off, but Luffy stood where he was for a few seconds longer, Zoro calling after him to hurry up. Luffy looked back at Smoker for another long moment before he smirked. "Hey, you're not such a bad guy, Smokey." Startled at what he said, Smoker's face grew red from either embarrassment or anger, they didn't know. "Would you get the heck out of here, Straw Hat?" he roared, attacking him, which caused them all to start running once again. Zoro smirking behind him as they ran to catch up with the others. "Hurry!" Usopp cried out. "Those Marines are hot on our heels." "Alright guys." Luffy cried out, taking the lead. "We've got lots to do, so we're not gonna stop until we get to Alubarna. Are you with me?"